As Max stepped into the golden sunlight, something in the air had changed. Was it the weight of the key in his hand? Or was it the newfound belief in his own destiny? Perhaps it was something even greater, an invisible force, a divine presence that had been guiding him all along. In life, we often chase wealth, power, and success, believing they are the keys to happiness. But true abundance comes when we align ourselves with something much grander than material riches. The universe rewards those who act with integrity, those who give as much as they receive, and those who trust in the unseen forces that shape our fate. Max walked out of that store not just with a golden key, but with a lesson, the realization that faith, kindness, and the courage to believe in something greater than ourselves are the true secrets to unlocking miracles. Maybe that old shopkeeper wasn't just a businessman. Maybe he was something else, a messenger, a guide, or even a sign from the divine. And so, dear Leo, the question is not just whether gold will bring you success, but whether you are ready to open your heart to the magic of the universe. Because those who walk with faith, who live with kindness, and who believe in the divine will always find doors opening where they never expected. Look for the signs. Trust the journey. And remember, the stars have always had a plan for you. The morning light filtered through the weathered curtains, casting a soft golden glow across Olivia Morgan's bedroom. She'd been awake for hours, staring at the water stain on her ceiling, the one shaped vaguely like the state of Texas, while mentally calculating which bills could wait another week and which demanded immediate attention. At 24, Olivia had mastered the art of financial triage, a skill she'd never wanted but now couldn't imagine living without. Her alarm clock hadn't yet rung, but she reached over and silenced it anyway. 5:15. Another day of carefully orchestrated chaos lay ahead, a morning shift at Magnolia Cafe, followed by an afternoon at Harrington's bookstore. Then evening tutoring sessions with high school students struggling through the same literature classics she'd once devoured with passion. 3 jobs, barely enough income, and a soul-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to remedy. Olivia slipped from bed, careful not to wake her 16-year-old sister Grace, who shared the small room with her. In the soft morning light, Grace's face looked younger, unburdened by the responsibilities that had been thrust upon her too soon. Olivia gently tucked the blanket around her sister's shoulders before padding quietly to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a face she sometimes barely recognized, auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, green eyes shadowed with fatigue, a determined set to her jaw that hadn't been there before her father's death 13 months ago. Thomas Morgan had been the family's anchor, a high school English teacher whose passion for literature had inspired Olivia's own degree choice. His sudden heart attack had left them not only emotionally bereft but financially adrift, with medical bills and a mortgage that his modest life insurance policy had barely touched. Just another day, she whispered to her reflection, splashing cold water on her face. Just keep moving forward. 20 minutes later, dressed in the black pants and white button-down required for the cafe, Olivia moved quietly through the small kitchen, preparing a pot of coffee and laying out her mother's medication beside a notepad where she'd written, *Mom. Don't forget Dr. Abernathy at 2:30. Jason will drive you. Love you. Live *. Diana Morgan's chronic condition had worsened in the months following her husband's death, as if grief had physically manifested in her body. The medical bills kept coming, a relentless tide of payment notices and insurance rejections that Olivia sorted through each evening after her mother had gone to bed, shielding her from the worst of their financial reality. The coffee maker gurgled its final notes as Olivia gathered her things. She poured a cup, adding the precise amount of cream her mother preferred, and carried it to the doorway of her mother's bedroom. Diana was already awake, propped against pillows, her once vibrant face now lined with pain and premature age. She smiled at her daughter, accepting the coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "You're up early," Diana observed, though they both knew this was Olivia's normal routine. "Maggie wants me to help with a catering order before the morning rush." Olivia perched on the edge of the bed. "I left your pills on the counter, and Jason promised he'd take you to your appointment." Diana's eyes clouded with familiar guilt. "I hate that you're working so hard because of me." "Not because of you, Mom. For all of us." Olivia squeezed her mother's hand. "We're going to be okay. I promise." It was a promise Olivia wasn't entirely sure she could keep, but she'd learned that sometimes hope was as necessary as oxygen. She kissed her mother's forehead and headed for the door, pausing briefly to look in on her 19-year-old brother Jason, sprawled across his bed in the room that had once been their father's study. His textbooks lay open beside him, evidence of another late night balancing his college coursework with his part-time job at a local hardware store. The morning air carried the distinctive blend of salt and jasmine that defined Charleston in early September, hot and humid but with the first whispered promise of autumn. Olivia walked the 8 blocks to Magnolia Cafe, using the time to mentally rehearse the day ahead. Her English literature degree from the University of South Carolina hung framed on her bedroom wall, a reminder of dreams temporarily deferred. She'd graduated with honors and plans for graduate school, perhaps eventually a teaching position like her father's. Life had other ideas. Morning, Miss Olivia, called Mr. Patterson, an elderly gentleman who faithfully swept the sidewalk outside his antique shop each morning. Beautiful day the Lord's making, isn't it? Sure is, Mr. Patterson, she replied with a genuine smile that momentarily lightened her features. Save me any treasures this week? The old man chuckled, leaning on his broom. Got a first edition Fitzgerald that might interest you. Only $20, special price for my favorite literary scholar. Olivia's heart skipped. Fitzgerald, her father's favorite. $20 represented nearly 3 hours of after-tax wages, money that should go toward her mother's growing stack of medical bills or Jason's textbooks. But some temptation spoke directly to the soul. I'll stop by Thursday, she promised, already calculating which lunch she could skip to afford the small indulgence. Hold it for me? He nodded, his weathered face crinkling with understanding. It's not going anywhere, child. The bell above Magnolia Cafe's door jangled cheerfully as Olivia entered, the familiar scent of fresh coffee and baking pastries enveloping her like an old friend. There she is. Maggie, the owner, called from behind the counter. Her round face was flushed from the heat of the kitchen, gray hair escaping from beneath her hairnet. Thought you might be running late, sugar. Not me, Olivia replied, already tying her apron strings. Dad always said being on time means you're already 10 minutes late. Maggie's expression softened at the mention of Olivia's father. He was a good man, your daddy. Would be mighty proud of you. Olivia swallowed the sudden tightness in her throat. I hope so. The morning rush descended like a well-choreographed storm, businessmen in crisp suits, young mothers with children in tow, tourists consulting guidebooks while ordering complicated coffee concoctions. Olivia moved through it all with practiced efficiency, remembering regular customers' orders and offering genuine smiles that masked her exhaustion. During a rare lull, she pulled a folded newspaper from beneath the counter, flipping immediately to the classifieds section. Red circles marked the jobs she'd already applied for, each representing a silent prayer for something better, something that might utilize her degree and pay enough to make a real difference in her family's precarious finances. Still hunting? Maggie asked, refilling the coffee urns. Always, Olivia sighed, scanning for new listings. Something has to give, Mags. Mom's medical bills keep piling up, Jason needs new glasses, and Grace outgrew her winter coat. I'm running out of hours in the day to work. Maggie patted her shoulder sympathetically. You're doing the best you can, honey. That's all anyone can ask. Sometimes the best isn't enough, Olivia murmured, turning the page. The morning melted into afternoon, and Olivia's shift at the cafe ended in a flurry of wiping tables and restocking supplies. She changed quickly in the tiny employee bathroom, exchanging her coffee-stained apron for the navy polo shirt required at Harrington's bookstore. The familiar scent of books, paper, ink, and possibility usually lifted her spirits, but today even this small pleasure felt hollow. Mr. Harrington was waiting for her when she arrived, his thin face unusually solemn. He gestured toward his cluttered office at the back of the store, and Olivia felt a chill of premonition. Please, sit down, Olivia, he said, clearing a stack of invoices from the chair opposite his desk. I'm actually running a bit behind schedule, she replied, remaining standing. I thought I'd start with the new arrivals in fiction today. He shook his head slowly. I'm afraid that won't be necessary. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. I've been dreading this conversation, Mr. Harrington continued, removing his wire-rimmed glasses to polish them nervously. You're one of the best employees I've ever had. Your knowledge of literature, your work ethic, but the numbers don't lie. With the new Barnes & Noble opening just 3 blocks away, our sales are down nearly 40%. Olivia felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. You're letting me go. It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway, unable to meet her eyes. I have to cut staff, and as the most recent hire. I'm truly sorry, Olivia. I've prepared a letter of recommendation. 2 weeks severance pay as well. She accepted the envelope he offered with numb fingers, her mind already racing through calculations. Rent due in 10 days, the electricity bill marked final notice. Her mother's prescription waiting at the pharmacy. I understand, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Harrington. His relief at her composed response was palpable. "You're welcome to take some books with you. Anything from the clearance section." A small token of appreciation. Outside, the afternoon sun seemed mockingly bright. Olivia leaned against the brick wall of the bookstore, allowing herself exactly 60 seconds of panic, counting each heartbeat, feeling the rough texture of the bricks against her palms, anchoring herself in physical sensation to prevent the spiral of anxiety threatening to overtake her. 60. She straightened, squared her shoulders, and began walking toward the public library 6 blocks away. No time for self-pity. She had resumes to revise and applications to complete before her evening tutoring session. The library welcomed her with cool, quiet air and the comforting hush of whispered conversations. Olivia claimed her usual spot at a back table, spreading out her materials with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. Her laptop, 6 years old and increasingly temperamental, protested with a series of beeps before reluctantly powering on. "Need some company?" Olivia looked up to find Hannah Davis standing beside her table, 2 paper cups of coffee in hand. With her stylish bob and confident smile, Hannah represented everything Olivia might have been in another life. Carefree, ambitious, pursuing her dreams instead of merely surviving. "You're a lifesaver," Olivia said gratefully, accepting the offered coffee. "How did you know I'd be here?" Hannah slid into the chair opposite her. "Educated guess. You always retreat to the library when life gets complicated." "What happened?" "Harrington's let me go. Downsizing." Hannah winced. "Damn. I'm sorry, Liv. It's fine. I just need to find something else. Preferably something that pays more than minimum wage." "Actually," Hannah hesitated, pulling out her phone. "I might have something. Claire Wilson, you remember her from that fundraiser last spring? She works in HR at Westbrook Innovations. They're looking for a personal assistant for the CEO." Olivia raised an eyebrow skeptically. "I'm hardly qualified to be an executive assistant at a tech company." "It's not exactly a typical executive assistant position," Hannah explained, scrolling through her emails. "It's more personal. The CEO had some kind of accident. They've gone through 3 assistants in 2 months. Claire's desperate." "That doesn't sound promising." "The pay is," Hannah countered, showing Olivia the screen. $85,000 a year, plus benefits. The figure made Olivia's coffee catch in her throat. It was more than triple her current combined income from all 3 jobs. "There has to be a catch," she said when she could speak again. Hannah's expression confirmed her suspicion. "The CEO, Ethan Westbrook, has apparently become difficult since his accident. Claire wouldn't give me details, but reading between the lines, he's made working conditions challenging." "Challenging how?" "Demanding, temperamental, possibly verbally abusive." Hannah shrugged. "But $85,000, Liv. Full medical benefits, paid vacation. You could actually take your mom to those specialists in Baltimore." Olivia stared at the job listing, possibility and trepidation warring within her. "Send me the details. I'll apply tonight." "Already forwarded it," Hannah said with a triumphant smile. "And I may have already mentioned you to Claire. She wants to meet you tomorrow at 9. "Tomorrow?" "Hannah, I can't just." "Already cleared it with Maggie. She's giving you the morning off. And before you argue, this is what friends do." Hannah reached across the table to squeeze Olivia's hand. "Let someone help you for once." That evening, after finishing her tutoring session with a struggling high school junior, Olivia returned to the small bungalow her family had called home for 3 generations. The porch light flickered erratically, another repair they couldn't afford, casting uncertain shadows across the worn welcome mat. Inside, she found her mother asleep on the couch, an open medical textbook resting on her chest. Diana Morgan had once been vibrant and robust, but illness had hollowed her cheeks and threaded silver through her dark hair prematurely. At 50, she looked a decade older, the stress of widowhood and chronic illness etched into every line of her face. Olivia gently removed the book and covered her mother with the crocheted afghan that had been her grandmother's. In the kitchen, she found evidence of her siblings' evening. Dishes in the sink, A note from Jason saying he was studying at the library until closing. Another from Grace explaining she was at volleyball practice and had a ride home. She opened the refrigerator, surveying its meager contents with a critical eye. Tomorrow was Thursday, payday at the cafe, which meant one more day of creative meal planning. She assembled a sandwich and carried it to the small desk in the corner of the living room that served as their family office. Her father's old desktop computer hummed to life, the sound as familiar as his voice had been. Thomas Morgan had written 2 moderately successful novels on this machine, spending evenings crafting stories after long days teaching high school English. Olivia ran her fingers along the worn keyboard, feeling closer to him somehow in this small ritual. The Westbrook Innovations website loaded slowly, revealing a sleek, modern interface that spoke of wealth and technological sophistication. She navigated to the About section, curious about the man who might become her employer. Ethan Westbrook stared back at her from the screen, a professional headshot that nonetheless captured something compelling about the man. Dark hair, precisely cut. Eyes that seemed too intense for a corporate photograph, as if he were challenging the photographer rather than posing for him. Strong jaw, no smile. The accompanying biography was impressive but impersonal. MIT graduate, founded Westbrook Innovations at 23, pioneered breakthroughs in adaptive technology, numerous awards and accolades. Nothing about an accident. Nothing to explain why such a successful man had become so difficult that his company couldn't retain personal assistants. Olivia spent the next 2 hours researching everything she could find about Ethan Westbrook and crafting a resume that emphasized her organizational skills and adaptability rather than her literary background. By the time she finished, the house was quiet, her siblings having returned and gone to bed. She saved the documents, sent them to her email for printing at the library tomorrow, and finally allowed herself to imagine what $85,000 a year would mean. No more choosing between electricity and medication. No more patching Grace's winter coat. No more watching her mother ration her pain pills to make them last longer. Just as she was shutting down the computer, an email notification appeared. A response from Claire Wilson. "Looking forward to meeting you tomorrow," it read. 9 a.m. sharp at Westbrook Tower. Bring government ID for security clearance. Olivia stared at the message, a mixture of hope and trepidation washing over her. Tomorrow might change everything. Six months earlier, Ethan Westbrook had believed in his own invincibility. Standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, 52 stories above downtown Charleston, he had surveyed the city with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had conquered every challenge life had presented. At 35, he controlled a technology empire valued at over $3 billion. His innovations had revolutionized adaptive technology for people with disabilities. Forbes had recently named him one of the 40 under 40 most influential business leaders in America. That particular evening, he had additional cause for celebration. After 18 months of negotiations, Westbrook Innovations had finalized the acquisition of their chief competitor, a deal worth $50 million that would cement their market dominance for the foreseeable future. To unparalleled success, David Chun had said, raising a glass of 30-year-old Macallan Scotch. As Ethan's oldest friend and business partner, David had been with him since the beginning. 2 ambitious MIT students working out of a garage, fueled by ramen noodles and relentless determination. To the next chapter, Ethan had responded, the amber liquid burning pleasantly as he swallowed. The celebration dinner had stretched late into the evening. A private room at Charleston's most exclusive restaurant filled with key executives and their partners. Ethan had played his role perfectly. Charming, confident, graciously accepting congratulations while deflecting praise to his team. If anyone noticed he drank little and smiled rarely, they attributed it to his well-known intensity rather than any personal dissatisfaction. Only David, watching him from across the table, recognized the familiar restlessness in his friend's eyes, the hunger for the next challenge that had driven Ethan since childhood. You could try enjoying the moment, David had suggested quietly as they waited for their cars at the valet stand. This is a major achievement, Ethan. Most people would take at least one night to savor it. Ethan had shrugged, checking his watch. The Tokyo markets open in an hour. I want to monitor how the announcement affects our stock. David had sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing. At least let Marcus drive you. You've had a few drinks. I'm fine, Ethan had insisted, tipping the valet generously as his Aston Martin purred to life. I'll call you tomorrow about the press conference. The night had been clear, stars unusually visible despite the city lights. Ethan had taken the coastal route home, enjoying the empty road and the powerful machine responding to his commands. The contract, signed and secured in his briefcase on the passenger seat, represented years of strategic planning finally coming to fruition. He had been 3 miles from his waterfront mansion when it happened. Later, the police report would state that the other driver had a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit, that he had crossed the center line at approximately 85 miles per hour, that the head-on collision had been unavoidable. Witnesses would describe the horrific sound of metal crushing against metal, the surreal image of the Aston Martin cartwheeling through the air before coming to rest upside down in a drainage ditch. Ethan remembered none of it. His last clear memory was of checking his rearview mirror, thinking absently that he should call his mother about the acquisition, though she would care more about the press coverage than the achievement itself. He woke 4 days later in Charleston Memorial Hospital, his body a constellation of pain, to find David asleep in a chair beside his bed and his parents engaged in tense conversation with a doctor in the hallway. "Don't try to move," David had said immediately, seeing Ethan's eyes open. "You're pretty banged up." Ethan had ignored the advice, attempting to sit up only to be overcome by waves of agony radiating from his spine. "What happened?" He'd managed through gritted teeth. The list of injuries had been extensive. Compound fracture of the right femur, shattered left ankle, 3 broken ribs, punctured lung, ruptured spleen, and most significantly, damage to his spinal cord at the L2-L3 vertebrae. The doctor had been clinically precise, explaining surgical procedures already performed and those still necessary, outlining a rehabilitation process measured in months rather than weeks. "Will I walk again?" Ethan had interrupted, cutting through the medical terminology to the question that mattered. The doctor's hesitation had been answer enough. "There's always hope with this type of incomplete spinal injury," he'd finally said. "But I want to be realistic about expectations. You're facing a long, difficult recovery with an uncertain outcome. Some patients regain significant mobility. Others don't. We simply won't know until." "Percentages," Ethan had demanded, his voice hard despite his weakened state. "Give me the statistical probability. Perhaps this conversation could wait until you're stronger," his mother had suggested, her perfectly manicured hand hovering near his but not quite touching. "Now." The word had been quiet but carried the authority that had built his empire. The doctor had sighed. "Based on the location and nature of your injury, approximately 30% of patients regain the ability to walk independently. Another 40% achieve mobility with assistive devices. The remaining 30%. That's enough," Richard Westbrook had interrupted, his stern face betraying rare emotion. "My son won't be in the last category. The Westbrooks don't accept defeat." 6 months of surgeries, pain, and grueling physical therapy had followed. Ethan approached rehabilitation with the same single-minded determination that had built Westbrook Innovations, pushing himself beyond recommended limits, demanding increasingly aggressive treatments, researching experimental procedures. His body, however, refused to respond to sheer willpower. Progress came in frustrating increments, movement returning to his right leg while his left remained stubbornly unresponsive, strength building in his upper body while chronic pain became his constant companion. The wheelchair he had initially viewed as a temporary inconvenience gradually transformed into a hated symbol of his new limitations. As physical healing plateaued, Ethan's psychological state deteriorated. The man who had once commanded boardrooms with quiet authority now lashed out at medical staff, fired therapists who suggested accepting his new reality, and retreated from the business he had built. David shouldered the burden of day-to-day operations, providing regular updates that Ethan often ignored. The final blow had come 3 months into his recovery, when Catherine Pierce, his fiancée of 2 years, had visited his hospital room with carefully rehearsed sympathy and a 3-carat diamond engagement ring. "This isn't what either of us signed up for, Ethan," she'd said, her voice gentle but firm. "You need to focus on your recovery, and I need to be realistic about the future." He'd watched her place the ring on his bedside table, noting with detached interest that her hand trembled slightly, the only crack in her composed facade. He hadn't argued, hadn't asked her to reconsider. He'd simply nodded once, dismissing her from his life with the same decisiveness he used in business. Only after she'd gone did he allow himself to acknowledge the truth. Catherine leaving wasn't a surprise. Their relationship had always been more about mutual benefit than deep connection. She gained access to his social circle and wealth. He acquired an appropriate partner for business functions. In their 2 years together, she had never once seen beyond the successful facade to the man beneath. When doctors finally cleared him to return home, Ethan had insisted on complete privacy. His waterfront mansion, once designed to showcase panoramic views of Charleston Harbor, was hastily retrofitted with ramps, widened doorways, and other accessibility features that he viewed as constant reminders of his diminished state. He established a routine structure to minimize human interaction, working through the night when pain prevented sleep, conducting necessary business via video conference rather than in person, allowing only his physical therapist and a rotating cast of increasingly short-term personal assistants into his carefully controlled environment. The first assistant, a competent middle-aged woman with experience working for difficult executives, had lasted 3 weeks before resigning. The second, a young man with military background and unflappable demeanor, had endured just over a month. The third had walked out mid-afternoon on her 11th day, leaving a resignation letter that described Ethan as psychologically abusive and impossible to satisfy. Claire Wilson, Westbrook Innovation's long-suffering HR director, had approached the problem with increasing desperation. The position now offered an exorbitant salary with generous benefits, requiring only a 1-month commitment with substantial completion bonus. Still, qualified candidates were becoming scarce as word spread about the impossible working conditions at the Westbrook mansion. On this particular morning, Ethan sat in his customized wheelchair before the wall of windows overlooking his neglected garden, watching rain streak down the glass. Physical therapy had been particularly grueling, leaving his muscles screaming in protest and his temper razor-thin. The latest pain medication, one of countless prescriptions he'd cycled through, left a metallic taste in his mouth without providing meaningful relief. The intercom buzzed, an unwelcome intrusion into his dark thoughts. "What?" he snapped, not bothering to mask his irritation. "Mr. Westbrook, it's Marcus," came the steady voice of his driver and security chief. "Ms. Wilson is here with a candidate for the assistant position. They're waiting in the main living room." Ethan considered refusing the meeting entirely. The thought of enduring another round of uncomfortable introductions, seeing pity poorly disguised as professional interest, explaining his needs to yet another person who would inevitably disappoint him, it was exhausting. "Tell them I'm busy," he said finally. A pause. Then, "Sir, Ms. Wilson asked me to remind you that the board meeting is in 3 weeks, and you'll need someone familiar with your schedule and requirements by then." The implicit threat was clear. The board, concerned about his extended absence, had been making noise about leadership changes. The upcoming meeting represented his opportunity to reassert control, to demonstrate that Ethan Westbrook remained capable of leading the company he had built. "Fine," he conceded with cold precision. 10 minutes, not a second more. He navigated his wheelchair through the wide hallways of the mansion, movements precise despite his lingering anger. The house had once reflected his aesthetic, minimalist, modern, meticulously organized. Now it felt like a beautiful prison, every adapted feature a reminder of what he had lost. As he approached the living room, he heard female voices, Claire's familiar professional tone and another, softer but with unexpected clarity. Something about that voice, its warmth, perhaps, or its lack of pretense, made him pause momentarily before entering. Claire rose immediately when he appeared in the doorway, her practiced smile barely masking her nervousness. "Ethan, thank you for making time this morning. I'd like to introduce Olivia Morgan, who's interested in the personal assistant position." The young woman beside her stood as well, and Ethan took a moment to assess her. Mid-20s, he guessed. Average height. Auburn hair pulled back in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. No designer labels or obvious attempts to impress with appearance. Her eyes met his directly. The morning light filtered through the massive windows of Ethan Westbrook's waterfront mansion, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Olivia Morgan stood in the kitchen, meticulously preparing coffee according to the exacting specifications she'd been given on her first day. French press. Water heated to precisely 195 degrees Fahrenheit. Beans ground exactly 17 seconds. Steeped for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Not a moment more or less. She'd been Ethan's personal assistant for exactly 1 week, and already she'd memorized a manual's worth of preferences, protocols, and prohibitions. The salary $85,000 a year plus benefits made the effort worthwhile, especially with her mother's medical bills mounting and her siblings' futures hanging in the balance. Still, there were moments when she wondered if any amount of money was worth enduring the Arctic chill of Ethan Westbrook's demeanor. The coffee timer chimed softly. Olivia poured the dark liquid into a simple white porcelain mug, no handles, warmed beforehand, and placed it on a small tray alongside the morning's Wall Street Journal and Ethan's 8 a.m. medications. She checked her watch, 7:58 a.m. Perfect timing. She found him already at work in his home office, the wheelchair positioned before a wall of screens displaying financial data, engineering schematics, and news feeds. His dark hair was neatly combed, his crisp blue button-down and charcoal slacks impeccable, as if compensating for the mobility he'd lost. He didn't look up as she entered. "Good morning, Mr. Westbrook," she said, her voice professionally pleasant. "Your coffee and medication." "The Wilson contract needs revision," he replied without preamble, still not looking at her. "The terms in Section 4 are unacceptable. Have legal redraft it and get it back to me by noon." Olivia placed the coffee precisely 6 inches from his right hand, close enough to reach, far enough to avoid accidental spills. "I'll contact them immediately. Would you like me to schedule a call with Mr. Peterson to discuss the changes?" "Unnecessary. Just tell them to fix it." He finally glanced at the coffee, then at her. "This is cold." Olivia blinked in surprise. She timed it perfectly, as she had every morning. "I apologize. I'll bring you another." "Don't bother. I'll drink it." He turned back to his screens, dismissing her with the subtle shift of his attention. In the kitchen, Olivia took a deep breath, counting silently to 10 as she leaned against the counter. $3,269.23 per bi-weekly paycheck. Her mother's specialist appointment next month. Jason's tuition payment. Grace's college applications. The numbers scrolled through her mind like a mantra, reinforcing her resolve. The week continued in much the same vein, Ethan issuing terse commands, finding fault with minor details, maintaining a glacial distance despite their physical proximity. Olivia learned to anticipate his needs, to read the subtle signs of increasing pain in the tightening around his eyes, to distinguish between genuine criticism and displaced frustration. She also began leaving small, strategic notes alongside his documents, concise observations or suggestions that might improve efficiency. At first, he ignored them entirely. By Thursday, she noticed him implementing one of her filing recommendations without acknowledgement. By Friday, he actually nodded when she handed him a report she'd reorganized for clarity. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. On her second Monday, Olivia arrived to find Marcus, Ethan's driver and security chief, waiting at the door with an unusually concerned expression. "Rough night," he said quietly as he let her in. "Been up since 3 a.m. from what I can tell. Pain's bad." Olivia nodded her thanks for the warning. "Has he eaten?" "Doubt it. Wouldn't answer when I knocked." She found Ethan in the library rather than his office, his wheelchair positioned before the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The room was dimly lit despite the morning sunshine outside, the motorized blinds partially lowered. He didn't turn as she entered, but the rigid set of his shoulders betrayed his awareness of her presence. Instead of her usual greeting, Olivia moved quietly to the bookshelves, giving him space. The library was impressive, thousands of volumes arranged by subject, from engineering and physics to history and classic literature. She ran her fingers lightly along the spines, noting first editions and rare collections that would have delighted her father. "The Hemingway is assigned first edition," Ethan said suddenly, his voice rougher than usual. Worth more than you make in a year. My father would have loved it, she replied, carefully removing her hand from the shelf. He taught English literature for 27 years. Taught? Past tense. He died last year. Heart attack. Ethan was silent for a moment. That's why you took this job? To support your family. It wasn't a question, but Olivia answered anyway. Yes. My mother's medical bills alone. She trailed off, suddenly conscious of overstepping the carefully maintained professional boundaries. What did he teach you about Hemingway? Ethan asked unexpectedly. Olivia smiled slightly, memories warming her voice. That his prose was like mathematics, precise, economical, with nothing wasted. Dad said you could learn more about writing from Hemingway's punctuation than from most authors' entire works. Your father sounds like a perceptive man. He was. A moment of silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable. Then Ethan's professional mask slipped back into place. The Tokyo conference call is at 11. I'll need the quarterly projections and the prototype specifications ready by 10:30. They're already prepared, Olivia replied. I'll bring them with your coffee in 20 minutes. As she turned to leave, Ethan spoke again, his voice almost hesitant. Ms. Morgan. She paused at the doorway. Yes. You may borrow the Hemingway if you wish. Just be careful with it. The unexpected gesture caught her off guard. Thank you, Mr. Westbrook. I will. That small moment of connection, fragile as morning frost, marked a subtle shift in their dynamic. Ethan remained demanding and often abrupt, but the deliberate cruelty seemed to fade from his interactions. Olivia, in turn, grew more confident in offering suggestions or occasionally pushing back when his requests became unreasonable. She began leaving books on his desk, not with any comment or suggestion that he read them, but simply placed where he might notice them during his long, pain-filled nights. First editions from his own collection opened to passages that had moved her. He never mentioned them, but she would find them in different positions the next morning, evidence that he'd at least handled them. By the third week, Olivia had established a rhythm to their days, anticipating Ethan's needs with increasing accuracy. She learned that his pain was typically worst in the early mornings and after physical therapy sessions. She scheduled his most demanding meetings during the midday hours when his medication was most effective. She recognized when he needed silence and when he might be receptive to brief conversation. It was during one such receptive moment, as she organized research materials for an upcoming presentation, that she ventured a more personal question. Mr. Westbrook, would you prefer if I moved your workspace to the sunroom for the afternoon? The natural light might be beneficial. He looked up from his computer, brow furrowed. Why would I want that? Studies show natural light improves cognitive function and mood, she replied, keeping her tone matter of fact. And the garden view, while currently a bit neglected, offers a change of perspective from the harbor. Ethan's expression shifted from dismissive to considering. The garden was my mother's project. She lost interest after it was no longer useful for social events. Olivia nodded, absorbing this rare personal detail. It has good bones. The stone pathways and that magnificent oak tree provide excellent structure. You know about gardening? My father was the gardener in our family. He believed any space could be transformed with the right vision and enough patience. She smiled slightly. I mostly provided the manual labor. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fine. The sunroom. For today only. It took 30 minutes to relocate his essential equipment, laptop, reference materials, medication. Olivia arranged everything according to his preferences, positioning his wheelchair where he could see both the garden and his screens without glare. When he wheeled himself into the space, she noticed a momentary softening in his expression as sunlight touched his face. He didn't thank her, but he worked there for 3 hours without complaint. Longer than he typically remained in one location. The next day, he requested the sunroom again without prompting. Small victories, Olivia reminded herself. Small steps forward. Charleston's unpredictable autumn weather brought an early thunderstorm in the 4th week of Olivia's employment. She arrived at the mansion to find the sky an ominous slate gray, the wind already whipping whitecaps across the harbor. By mid-afternoon, the storm had intensified, rain lashing against the windows like liquid artillery. Olivia was reviewing correspondence in the kitchen when the first power flicker occurred. She immediately saved her work and began gathering emergency supplies. Flashlights, battery-powered lanterns, Ethan's backup medication that required refrigeration. Years of hurricane seasons had taught her to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. The second flicker lasted longer. The third plunged the mansion into darkness. Perfect, she muttered. waiting for the generator to kick in. When 10 seconds passed with no response, she reached for the flashlight and headed toward Ethan's office. She found him struggling with his wheelchair, the power outage having disabled its electronic controls. His face was tight with frustration and something else. Fear, perhaps, at his sudden helplessness. "The generator should start any moment," she said calmly, directing the flashlight beam toward the floor to avoid blinding him. "It won't," he replied tersely. The system detected a surge and shut down to protect the circuits. Manual override requires accessing the basement panel. Olivia nodded, quickly assessing the situation. "Can you tell me where to find it?" "I'll show you," he said, his voice hardening with determination. "But first, I need to get out of this useless chair." She approached carefully, respecting his space. "What do you need from me?" "There's a manual wheelchair in the hall closet. And I'll need—" He hesitated, jaw tight. "I'll need help transferring." The admission clearly cost him. Olivia kept her expression neutral, professional. "Of course." The next few minutes required an intimate choreography neither had anticipated in their working relationship. Ethan provided terse instructions as Olivia supported his weight, helping him from the powered chair to the manual one. His body was simultaneously stronger and more vulnerable than she had imagined. Powerful upper body developed from months of adaptation, legs atrophied from disuse. She felt the heat of him through the fine cotton of his shirt, noticed the scent of his cologne mingled with the sharper edge of pain medication. Neither spoke beyond necessary directions. When he was settled in the manual chair, a sheen of sweat visible on his forehead from exertion and pain, Ethan nodded once. "Thank you." The simple acknowledgement felt monumental. Together they navigated the darkened hallways, Ethan guiding her toward the basement access. The storm's fury increased, thunder crashing directly overhead as they reached the utility room. Olivia held the flashlight while Ethan, who insisted on handling the override himself, worked the complex series of switches that would restore partial power. "It will take approximately 3 minutes," he explained as they waited in the dim basement. "Emergency systems only, minimal lighting, refrigeration for medications, security. No internet, no electronics. Like camping but with a roof," Olivia offered with a small smile. Ethan glanced at her, surprised. "You camp?" "Used to. Family tradition. 2 weeks every summer in the Blue Ridge Mountains." "That sounds uncomfortable." "It was glorious," she countered. "Stars like you wouldn't believe. Campfire stories. My dad's terrible attempts at fishing. We couldn't afford fancy vacations, but those mountains gave us something money couldn't buy." The lights flickered, then stabilized at a dim glow. Ethan's face was partially shadowed, but she caught a flicker of something in his expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or a more complex emotion she couldn't name. "We should get back upstairs," he said, breaking the moment. "The manual chair is challenging on the ramps." "I can help," she offered. "I can manage," he insisted, pride reasserting itself. But the incline proved steeper than anticipated, and after a moment of stubborn struggle, Ethan allowed Olivia to assist, her hands steadying the chair as they ascended together. The simple physical cooperation felt symbolic somehow, a metaphor for the gradual shift in their relationship. With the power limited to emergency systems, the evening's work was impossible. Olivia gathered candles and lanterns in the living room, creating islands of warm light in the darkness. She prepared a simple meal of sandwiches and fruit, foods that required no cooking, and brought them on a tray to where Ethan waited. "We should discuss contingency plans," he said as she arranged the food on the coffee table. "If the storm continues, connectivity could be compromised for days." "The Tokyo presentation can wait until morning," Olivia interjected gently. "There's nothing we can do tonight except conserve energy. Both the mansion's and yours." He looked as if he might argue, then subsided, the fight leaving him as a particularly violent thunderclap shook the windows. "I dislike inactivity." "It's not inactivity. It's regrouping." She settled into an armchair across from him, the candles between them casting flickering shadows. Sometimes stepping back provides perspective. Ethan's mouth quirked in what might almost have been a smile. Did your father teach you that philosophical approach as well? Actually, yes. He called it the long view. When you're stuck in the trees, climb higher to see the forest. She tilted her head, studying him in the candlelight. What did your father teach you? The question crossed an unspoken boundary. For a moment, Olivia thought he would retreat behind his usual wall of privacy. Instead, he answered with unexpected candor. That success is measured in achievements, not emotions. That weakness is unacceptable. That the Westbrook name demands excellence, regardless of personal cost. His voice was even almost clinical, but Olivia heard the underlying current of old pain. That sounds demanding. It was effective. Westbrook innovations wouldn't exist otherwise. And yet, here you are, trapped in a power outage like any ordinary mortal, she observed, keeping her tone light. Ethan's laugh surprised them both. A short, genuine sound that transformed his face, revealing the man he might have been before pain and bitterness became his constant companions. Touché, Ms. Morgan. Olivia, she corrected impulsively. If we're going to be stranded in a storm together, I think first names are permitted. He considered this, then nodded. Olivia. Her name in his voice sounded different somehow, more significant than it had any right to be. Then you should call me Ethan, when we're not in professional settings. Ethan, she repeated, testing the new familiarity. Do you play cards, Ethan? We have hours to kill, and I happen to be exceptional at gin rummy. Another ghost of a smile. Exceptional? That sounds like a challenge. Only if you're up for losing. Gracefully, of course. The Westbrooks never lose gracefully. We simply don't lose. She raised an eyebrow, already retrieving a deck of cards from the side table drawer. We'll see about that. They played for hours as the storm raged outside, the competitive spirit gradually giving way to comfortable conversation. Ethan revealed snippets of his life before the accident, MIT at 17, his first startup at 22, the acquisition that made him a millionaire before 30. Olivia shared stories of her family, her mother's nursing career cut short by illness, her brother's determination to finish college despite financial obstacles, her sister's dream of medical school. You've taken on an enormous responsibility, Ethan observed as she dealt another hand. Supporting your entire family at 24. Olivia shrugged, uncomfortable with his assessment. You do what's necessary for the people you love. It's not exceptional. In my experience, it is. He arranged his cards thoughtfully. Most people your age are focused on their own advancement, their own desires. Maybe you've been spending time with the wrong people, she suggested with a small smile. He looked up, meeting her eyes in the candlelight. Perhaps I have. The power returned shortly before midnight, systems humming back to life throughout the mansion. The sudden brightness seemed to break the spell of their unusual evening, reality reasserting itself with the restored electricity. I should check the security systems, Ethan said, shifting back into his professional persona. And you should get home if the roads are passable. Marcus texted that the main roads are clear, Olivia confirmed, already gathering the cards and returning the room to its usual order. I'll see you in the morning. As she prepared to leave, collecting her rain jacket and purse, Ethan called after her. Olivia. She turned, finding him watching her with an unreadable expression. Thank you, he said simply, for your assistance tonight. The words encompassed more than just the practical help with the power outage, and they both knew it. Olivia nodded, accepting the gratitude and its deeper implications. You're welcome, Ethan. The storm marked a turning point in their relationship. The formal barriers remained. He was still her employer, she his employee, but something had shifted, a door opened that neither could completely close again. Ethan began asking for her opinion on business matters, considering her suggestions with genuine attention. Olivia found herself sharing more personal observations, no longer walking on eggshells around his moods. One afternoon, while organizing files in his home office, Olivia discovered a folder labeled Architectural Designs tucked between technical manuals. Curiosity overcoming professional discretion, she opened it to find detailed sketches of buildings, innovative structures with sweeping lines and sustainable features, each drawing meticulously rendered and annotated in Ethan's precise handwriting. She was so absorbed in the drawings that she didn't hear him enter the room. "Those are private," he said, his voice sharp with sudden defensiveness. Olivia startled, quickly closing the folder. "I'm sorry. I was organizing the shelves and decided to invade my privacy?" The coldness had returned to his tone, walls slamming back into place. "No, She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze directly. "They're beautiful, Ethan. I didn't know you were an architect." "I'm not." He wheeled closer, taking the folder from her hands. "It was a hobby. Before." The unspoken word hung between them, before the accident, before everything changed. "You're talented," she said quietly. "These designs are extraordinary." He stared at the folder, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "I wanted to build things that would last. Structures that would change how people live, how they interact with their environment." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Ironic, considering my current limitations." "Your mind hasn't changed," Olivia observed. "Your vision is still intact. Vision without execution is worthless." "I disagree. Vision is where everything begins." She gestured toward the window where the neglected garden stretched toward the harbor. "Like that space out there. It needs vision before it needs labor." Ethan followed her gaze, studying the overgrown landscape. "What would you do with it? If you had the vision?" The question surprised her. "Me? You mentioned your father was a gardener. What would he see in that space?" Olivia moved to the window, considering the tangled vegetation and crumbling pathways. "He'd see the bones first, the structure beneath the chaos. The oak tree is an anchor, the stone paths as arteries. He'd work with what exists rather than imposing something artificial." Ethan wheeled beside her, their reflections ghostly in the glass. "And then? He'd create rooms within the space, areas for different purposes. A meditation garden here," she pointed, "where the morning light hits first. A culinary garden near the kitchen. Perhaps a water feature there where natural drainage already exists." "You've given this thought," he observed. "I look at it every day," she admitted. "It seems a shame to waste such potential." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "It would require significant work. Most worthwhile things do." Another silence, this one contemplative rather than tense. Finally, Ethan nodded, a decision apparently reached. "Draw up a proposal," he said. "Budget, timeline, required resources. If it's reasonable, we'll implement it." Olivia turned to him, surprised. "Really? Consider it a project management exercise." His tone was businesslike, but his eyes held something warmer. "And perhaps some physical therapy for me. My doctors have been insisting I engage in more varied activities." The garden project began the following week, a collaboration neither had anticipated but which quickly became central to their evolving relationship. Olivia researched native plants and sustainable practices, drawing up detailed plans that incorporated Ethan's architectural perspective with her father's gardening wisdom. Ethan, in turn, applied his technical mind to irrigation systems and structural elements, designing adaptive tools that would allow him to participate despite his physical limitations. They spent hours in the garden together, Olivia clearing overgrowth and preparing soil, Ethan directing placement and contributing where his upper body strength allowed. The physical work seemed to ease something in him, perhaps the frustration of enforced inactivity, perhaps the simple human need to create rather than merely exist. "My father would say a garden teaches patience," Olivia commented one afternoon as they planted native grasses along the restored pathway. "You can't rush growth." Ethan, his hands dirt-smudged from the rare physical labor, looked up with an expression she was learning to recognize as thoughtful rather than dismissive. "I've never been particularly patient." "I've noticed," she replied with a teasing smile. "But some things can't be accelerated no matter how much technology or money you throw at them." "An inconvenient truth," he acknowledged. "Especially for someone in my condition." "Your condition is part of your story, not the whole of it," Olivia said, the words emerging before she could consider their propriety. Ethan's hands stilled in the soil. "That's a generous perspective. It's a realistic one. You're still building things, Ethan. They're just different things than you planned." He didn't respond immediately, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice held an unfamiliar note of vulnerability. "What if the things I'm building now aren't as valuable as what I intended?" "Value is subjective," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "This garden might seem insignificant compared to a skyscraper or a tech innovation, but for the person who finds peace here, it could be priceless." Their hands were inches apart in the dark soil, the moment suspended between them like a fragile seedling. Then Ethan nodded, accepting her words without further argument, and they returned to their planting in companionable silence. As the garden slowly transformed from neglected space to thoughtful design, so too did their working relationship evolve into something more complex. The professional boundaries remained, but within them grew a friendship neither had anticipated, built on shared labor, mutual respect, and the gradual revelation of their true selves beneath careful facades. The first real crisis came 6 weeks into Olivia's employment. She arrived one morning to find Marcus waiting at the door, his usually stoic expression troubled. "He's had a bad night," the security chief said quietly. "Pain breakthrough. Refused to call the doctor." Olivia nodded, mentally adjusting her plans for the day. "Has he eaten? Wouldn't even open the door when I knocked. But he's in his office, I can see the lights on the security feed." She found Ethan at his desk, his appearance alarming, hair disheveled, complexion ashen, the same clothes he'd worn the previous day. His hands trembled slightly as he typed, and the set of his shoulders spoke of pain beyond ordinary endurance. "Good morning," she said, keeping her voice neutral as she set down his coffee. "I've moved your 10 a.m. video conference to tomorrow. The development team needed more time with the prototype anyway." Ethan looked up, eyes bloodshot from what was clearly a sleepless night. "I didn't authorize any schedule changes." "No, but you did authorize me to use my judgment in managing your calendar," she replied calmly. "And my judgment says you need a lighter schedule today. Your judgment is irrelevant. I have work to do." Olivia studied him for a moment, weighing her options. Confrontation would likely backfire, but acquiescence would enable self-destructive behavior she couldn't ignore. "When did you last take your medication?" she asked, changing tactics. A flicker of surprise crossed his face at the direct question. "That's not your concern. It is when it affects your work capacity," she countered. "And right now you're operating at maybe 30% efficiency. The board presentation is in 3 days. You need to be at your best." The mention of the board presentation, his first in-person appearance since the accident, hit its mark. Ethan's expression shifted from defiance to grudging consideration. "The medication isn't working," he admitted finally, voice rough with exhaustion. "I took a double dose 4 hours ago. It barely touched the pain." Olivia nodded, processing this information without visible reaction. "Have you called Dr. Winters? And tell him what? That his precious pain management protocol is failing? That I spent the night contemplating whether alcohol poisoning might be a viable alternative?" The bitter words spilled out, raw with a desperation he rarely allowed himself to show. Instead of retreating from his anger, Olivia moved closer, sitting in the chair across from his desk. "Yes, that's exactly what you should tell him. He can't help if he doesn't know the full picture." Ethan laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "There is no help. This is my reality now." "It's your reality today," she corrected gently. "It doesn't have to be your reality forever. But right now you need rest and medical attention, not another day of pushing yourself beyond human limits." He stared at her, conflict evident in his expression, the stubborn pride that demanded he continue warring with the physical reality that made such work nearly impossible. Finally, exhaustion won. "Make the call," he conceded. "But I'm staying." Morning light spilled across the Charleston harbor, painting the water in shades of gold and amber as seagulls traced lazy circles against the cloudless October sky. From the sunroom of Ethan Westbrook's waterfront mansion, Olivia Morgan paused in her work to admire the view. 2 months into her employment as Ethan's personal assistant, she had developed a routine of arriving early, using the quiet morning hours to prepare for the day ahead while enjoying moments of solitude in what had become her favorite space in the sprawling home. The garden project had progressed remarkably in the weeks since its inception. What had once been an overgrown tangle of neglect now showed clear signs of revival. Freshly mulched beds, pruned shrubs, and stone pathways cleared of debris. Olivia's vision, combined with Ethan's surprising enthusiasm, had transformed not only the landscape but something less tangible between them as well. The sound of wheels on hardwood interrupted her contemplation. She turned to find Ethan entering the sunroom, his appearance meticulously groomed as always, dark hair precisely cut, steel blue button-down shirt crisp against charcoal slacks. Only someone who knew him well would notice the slight shadows beneath his eyes, evidence of another difficult night. "You're here early," he observed, maneuvering his wheelchair to the table where she had arranged his morning coffee and medication. "The early bird catches the worm," Olivia replied with a smile. "Or in this case, avoids rush hour traffic on the Cooper River Bridge. A slight curve touched Ethan's lips. Not quite a smile, but closer than he would have allowed 2 months ago. Practical as always. "I've prepared the quarterly reports for your review," she said, gesturing to the tablet beside his coffee. "And Dr. Williams called to confirm she'll be here at 11 for your physical therapy session." Ethan nodded, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly at the mention of physical therapy. Despite his progress, these sessions remain challenging, physically demanding and emotionally fraught, as each small improvement was measured against what had been lost. "Also," Olivia continued, her tone deliberately casual, "I found something interesting while organizing your storage room yesterday." She reached into her bag and withdrew a leather portfolio, its surface worn with age and use. "I believe these are yours." Ethan stared at the portfolio, recognition flickering across his face. "Where did you find that?" "Behind some old financial records. It was nearly buried." She placed it on the table between them. "I wouldn't normally disturb your personal belongings, but it fell open when I moved the boxes, and I couldn't help noticing the drawings." His hand hovered over the portfolio, hesitant, as if touching it might conjure ghosts he wasn't prepared to face. "Those are from another lifetime." "They're remarkable," Olivia said quietly, "especially the sustainable housing designs, the integration of natural elements with modern technology. It's visionary." Ethan finally reached for the portfolio, opening it with careful movements. Inside lay dozens of architectural sketches, buildings, homes, community spaces, each rendered with precision and artistic sensitivity that revealed a side of him few had ever glimpsed. "I studied architecture before business," he said, his voice distant with memory. "It was my first passion. These were concepts for a project I planned to develop myself once I had the resources." "What happened?" His fingers traced the outline of a curved roof designed to collect rainwater. "Success happened. Westbrook Innovations took off faster than anticipated. There were investors to please, competitors to outmaneuver, an empire to build." A shadow crossed his face. "Architecture requires patience. I chose the faster path." Olivia studied him, seeing beyond the successful businessman to the creative soul beneath. "It's never too late to revisit old dreams. Some dreams have expiration dates," he replied, gesturing to his wheelchair. "Architectural sites aren't exactly wheelchair accessible. The design process doesn't require physical mobility," she countered. "And technology has advanced significantly. Virtual site visits, 3D modeling. Why are you pushing this?" Ethan interrupted, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. Olivia met his gaze directly. "Because I've seen how you come alive when we work on the garden design. How your mind engages with spatial problems and aesthetic choices. It's different from how you approach business decisions. Different doesn't mean better. No, but it might mean more fulfilling." She gestured toward the garden outside. "That project has given you something beyond just physical therapy. I think these drawings represent something similar, a part of yourself you've neglected." Ethan closed the portfolio, his expression unreadable. "I appreciate your concern for my fulfillment, Ms. Morgan, but I have a company to run and a board meeting to prepare for." The formal address, a retreat to safer, professional distance, signaled the end of the conversation. Olivia nodded, accepting the boundary he had reestablished. "Of course, Mr. Westbrook. The board presentation materials are ready for your review whenever you'd like to begin." She moved toward the door, giving him space with the architectural memories he clearly wasn't ready to confront. Before she could exit, however, his voice stopped her. "Olivia." She turned, finding his expression softer than she expected. "Thank you," he said simply, "for finding these, for seeing possibilities I've forgotten how to see." The vulnerability in his words touched something deep within her. "That's what fresh eyes are for," she replied gently. "Sometimes we all need someone to remind us of who we used to be." The moment lingered between them, fragile and significant, before Ethan nodded once and turned his attention to the work awaiting him. But the architectural portfolio remained on the table beside him, no longer hidden away with other abandoned dreams. 3 days later, Olivia arrived at the mansion to find an unfamiliar car in the circular driveway. A sleek black Mercedes with a Johns Hopkins Medical School decal on the rear window. Inside, she discovered Ethan in the living room with a woman she didn't recognize. Tall, professionally dressed, with silver-streaked dark hair and an air of quiet authority. "Ah, Olivia," Ethan said, gesturing her forward. "I'd like you to meet Dr. Sarah Williams, my physical therapist." "Sarah, this is Olivia Morgan, the assistant I mentioned." Dr. Williams extended her hand with a warm smile. "A pleasure to finally meet you, Olivia. Ethan speaks highly of your organizational skills." "Only my organizational skills?" Olivia asked with a teasing glance at Ethan. "He may have mentioned your stubbornness as well," Dr. Williams replied, her eyes twinkling. "A quality I find essential when dealing with difficult patients." Ethan cleared his throat. "If you two are finished discussing my shortcomings, perhaps we could return to the matter at hand." Dr. Williams nodded, her expression turning more serious. "As I was explaining, the new treatment protocol shows promising results for patients with similar spinal cord injuries. It combines intensive physical therapy with targeted electrical stimulation of the damaged nerve pathways." "And the success rate?" Olivia asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "Approximately 65% of participants have shown significant improvement in mobility," the doctor replied. "Though I should emphasize that significant varies widely by individual. For some, it means walking with assistive devices. For others, increased sensation or improved fine motor control." Olivia glanced at Ethan, trying to gauge his reaction to this information. His face remained carefully neutral, but she noticed the tension in his hands where they gripped the arms of his wheelchair. "The program requires a substantial commitment," Dr. Williams continued. 3 sessions weekly for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The first phase would take place at our facility in Baltimore. "Baltimore?" Olivia echoed, surprised. "Johns Hopkins is coordinating the research," Ethan explained. "I'd need to relocate temporarily." The implications washed over Olivia like a cold wave. 6 months in Baltimore would mean significant changes to their working arrangement, perhaps ending it entirely. The thought created an unexpected hollowness in her chest that she quickly attempted to suppress. "When would this begin?" she asked, keeping her voice professional. "That's what we're discussing," Ethan replied. "The next cohort starts in 3 weeks, but there are logistical challenges to consider." Dr. Williams gathered her materials, sensing the shift in the conversation. "I'll leave you the detailed information, Ethan. Take some time to consider it, but remember that spaces in the program are limited. I'll need your decision by Friday." After the doctor departed, a heavy silence filled the room. Olivia busied herself arranging papers on the coffee table, her mind racing with implications and possibilities. "You have concerns?" Ethan observed, watching her with that perceptive gaze that sometimes seemed to read her thoughts. "It's not my place to have concerns about your medical decisions," she replied carefully. "Since when has that stopped you from expressing your opinion?" His tone held no rancor, only a gentle challenge. Olivia met his eyes. "The program sounds promising. 6 months is a significant commitment, but if it improves your quality of life, it seems worthwhile." "But," he prompted, sensing her hesitation. "But nothing. It's your decision." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "I'd value your perspective, Olivia, not as my employee, but as someone who has—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Someone who has seen me at my worst and somehow found something worth engaging with anyway." The candid admission touched her deeply. She sat on the sofa across from him, gathering her thoughts. "I think hope is essential," she said finally. "But so is accepting reality. If you pursue this treatment believing it will completely restore what you've lost, you risk devastating disappointment. If you approach it as one step in an ongoing journey, with any improvement being valuable, then it seems like the right choice." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "And the logistical challenges?" My relocating would significantly impact your position here. Don't make this decision based on my employment situation, Olivia said firmly. I took this job knowing it might be temporary. Your health comes first. And your family? The financial obligations that led you to accept this position. The question revealed how much he had come to understand about her circumstances. Her mother's medical bills, her siblings' educational needs, the mortgage on their modest home. We'll manage, she said, with more confidence than she felt. We always have. Ethan wheeled closer, his expression unusually open. What if there were another option? You could come to Baltimore. Westbrook Innovations has an office there. You could continue as my assistant, managing communications with Charleston while I undergo treatment. The suggestion caught her off guard. You'd want me to relocate with you? You've proven yourself invaluable, he replied. His tone matter-of-fact, though his eyes held something warmer. And continuity would benefit the company during my partial absence. Olivia's mind raced through practical considerations. Her family's needs, temporary housing in Baltimore, the implications of such a significant change. I'd need to think about it, discuss it with my mother and siblings. Of course, take whatever time you need. He hesitated, then added more quietly. The offer stands regardless of your decision about Baltimore. Your position here is secure for as long as you want it. The assurance, so different from the cold businessman who had initially hired her, demonstrated how far they had come. Olivia smiled, genuinely touched by his consideration. Thank you, Ethan. That means more than you know. The crisp Charleston air carried the scent of blooming jasmine as Olivia expertly navigated Ethan's customized van through the historic streets. It was a Saturday afternoon, and against all odds, they were on their way to a local art gallery opening, an event that, just a few weeks prior, Ethan would have dismissed as frivolous and utterly beneath him. Olivia glanced at Ethan in the passenger seat. He was dressed impeccably, as always, in a tailored suit that somehow managed to look both formal and relaxed. The color, a deep charcoal, accentuated the sharp lines of his face and the intensity of his dark eyes. He was staring out the window, his expression unreadable, but Olivia sensed a certain tension in his posture. Nervous? She asked gently, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan turned, his gaze meeting hers with a flicker of something akin to amusement. Me? Nervous? Preposterous. I simply prefer to be prepared for all possible scenarios. Olivia chuckled softly. Right? And what scenarios are you anticipating at an art gallery opening? Incompetent artists, pretentious critics, and insipid conversations about abstract concepts that have no basis in reality. He paused, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Did I miss anything? Only the free wine and cheese, Olivia teased, and the potential for discovering a hidden masterpiece. The odds of that are astronomically low, Ethan countered, but the edge in his voice had softened. The gallery was tucked away on a quiet side street, its entrance marked by a simple sign and a scattering of people milling about on the sidewalk. As Marcus, ever vigilant, helped Ethan from the van, Olivia noticed several heads turning, whispers rippling through the crowd. Ethan Westbrook was a local celebrity, and his sudden public appearances after months of seclusion were invariably met with curiosity and speculation. Ready? Olivia asked, offering him her arm. Ethan hesitated for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before returning to her. As I'll ever be. He took her arm, his grip surprisingly firm, and together they made their way into the gallery. The room was filled with a diverse collection of paintings, sculptures, and mixed media installations, all vying for attention under the bright gallery lights. Olivia, who had always appreciated art but lacked any formal training, found herself drawn to a series of vibrant watercolors depicting scenes of the Charleston coast, marshlands at sunset, sailboats gliding across the harbor, seagulls soaring against a cerulean sky. Ethan, however, seemed less impressed. He surveyed the room with a critical eye, his expression betraying a certain disdain for what he clearly perceived as artistic mediocrity. Overpriced and derivative, he muttered, loud enough for Olivia to hear. Give it a chance, she chided gently. Art isn't about perfection. It's about expression. And what precisely is being expressed here? A lack of talent and a surplus of self-importance. Olivia rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help but smile. Ethan's blunt honesty, while sometimes abrasive, was also strangely endearing. As they moved through the gallery, Olivia noticed that people were giving them a wide berth, whispering behind cupped hands and stealing furtive glances. She understood their curiosity, but it also made her uncomfortable. Ethan, however, seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus solely on the art, or rather on what he perceived as its shortcomings. Suddenly, a woman approached them, her face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Westbrook, what an honor to have you here. I'm Cynthia Sterling, the gallery owner. Are you enjoying the exhibition?" Ethan turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "The exhibition is eclectic," he replied diplomatically. "But I appreciate your efforts in promoting local artists." Cynthia beamed. "Thank you. Are you an art collector yourself?" "I have a few pieces," Ethan conceded, "mostly architectural renderings and minimalist sculptures. I prefer precision and functionality to abstract emotionalism." Cynthia laughed nervously. "Well, we have something for everyone here. Perhaps you'd be interested in meeting some of the artists." Ethan hesitated, glancing at Olivia as if seeking her opinion. She nodded encouragingly. "That would be lovely," she said. "I'd love to hear more about their inspiration." As they were introduced to various artists, Olivia watched with quiet pride as Ethan gradually engaged more genuinely with the people around him. Though his critiques remained sharp, there was also a newfound willingness to listen, to consider perspectives different from his own. It was a small step, but a significant one for a man who had spent months shutting out the world. Later, as they prepared to leave, Ethan surprised her by purchasing one of the coastal watercolors, the very one she had admired earlier. "I thought you found it derivative," she said as they waited for Marcus to bring the van around. "It is," Ethan replied matter-of-factly. "But you liked it, and perhaps having it in the sunroom will remind me to occasionally value expression over precision." The simple gesture, acknowledging her taste, considering her perspective, warmed Olivia more than any grand declaration could have. It represented a shift in their relationship, a deepening of connection that transcended their professional roles. Later that evening, as they were working in the garden, Olivia noticed that Ethan was staring intently at a small patch of wildflowers that had sprung up near the stone pathway. "What are you looking at?" she asked. "Those flowers," he replied, his voice unusually soft. "I didn't plant them. They just appeared." "They're wildflowers," Olivia explained. "They grow wherever they can find a bit of sunlight and fertile soil. They're resilient, adaptable, and beautiful in their own way." Ethan reached out and gently touched one of the delicate petals, his expression thoughtful. "Like you," he said quietly. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "Like me. You've adapted to circumstances that would have broken most people," he said. "You've found beauty and joy in the midst of hardship. You're resilient, Olivia, more than you realize." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them standing in the twilight, connected by an unspoken understanding. As the days turned into weeks, the garden continued to flourish under their care. The vegetables grew plump and juicy, the flowers bloomed in a riot of color, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of herbs and blossoms. The garden had become more than just a landscaping project. It was a symbol of their deepening connection, a testament to the power of healing and growth. One warm evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Olivia found Ethan sitting on a bench near the water feature, his face bathed in the golden light. She joined him, settling onto the bench beside him. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, gazing at the garden. "It is," Ethan agreed. "But not just the garden. Everything. The light, the air, the sound of the water. It's all perfect." Olivia turned to him, her heart swelling with emotion. "You're changing, Ethan," she said softly. "You're letting go of the bitterness and embracing the beauty that's all around you." Ethan reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "It's because of you, Olivia," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "You've shown me that there's more to life than success and achievement. You've taught me to appreciate the simple things, to find joy in the everyday moments. You've given me hope." Their hands remained intertwined, their fingers interlacing as they sat in silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple. It was a perfect moment, a moment that Olivia knew she would cherish forever. The following week brought unexpected developments that further deepened their connection. Olivia arrived Monday morning to find Ethan already in the sunroom, surrounded by architectural drawings and digital renderings. Not the old portfolio she had discovered, but new designs clearly created recently. "You've been busy," she observed, setting down his coffee and medications. Ethan looked up, an unfamiliar energy animating his features. "I couldn't sleep. The Baltimore program got me thinking about accessibility in architectural design, how most spaces are created without consideration for people with mobility challenges." Olivia moved closer, examining the drawings with genuine interest. "These are beautiful. Is this a residential concept?" "A community center, actually." He guided her attention to the central rendering. Designed from the ground up with universal accessibility, but without the institutional feel that often characterizes such spaces. Natural light, flowing circulation, integrated technology that enhances independence rather than highlighting disability. The passion in his voice was striking, a vitality she had glimpsed only rarely during their garden planning sessions, now fully emerged. Olivia studied the designs more carefully, recognizing elements that reflected Ethan's personal experience with limited mobility combined with his natural aesthetic sensibility. "This is extraordinary work," she said sincerely. "Have you shown it to anyone else?" "Not yet." He hesitated, an unusual vulnerability crossing his face. "It's been 15 years since I designed anything serious. I'm not sure if the concept holds up to current standards." "I may not be an architectural expert," Olivia replied, "but I recognize vision when I see it. This deserves to be developed further." Ethan's expression softened with something like gratitude. "I was hoping you might say that, because I have a proposal that involves you directly." "Me?" Olivia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "The community center isn't just a concept. I own property in downtown Charleston that would be perfect for this project." His eyes held a spark of excitement she had never seen before. "While I'm in Baltimore for treatment, I'd like you to coordinate with a local architectural firm to develop these preliminary designs. You'd be my eyes and ears on the ground, ensuring the vision maintains its integrity." Olivia blinked in surprise. "Ethan, I don't have any background in architecture or project management. You have something more valuable, an understanding of the human elements that make spaces work. You've demonstrated that with our garden project." He gestured toward the transformed landscape outside. "Plus, you have the organizational skills to keep the process moving forward while I'm focused on treatment." The vote of confidence touched her deeply. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." He met her gaze directly. "I've decided to create a new division within Westbrook Innovations focused on accessible design, combining our technology with architectural innovation. This community center would be the first project, a proof of concept." The implications were significant. Not just a temporary assignment, but potentially a new direction for both Ethan's company and Olivia's career. She considered the opportunity carefully, aware that it represented far more than just a job. "I'd need to learn a lot very quickly," she said finally. "You're a quick study." A rare smile crossed his face. "And I'm a demanding teacher." "That's putting it mildly," she replied with a teasing grin. "But yes, I'd be honored to help bring this vision to life." The project immediately transformed their working relationship, elevating it from employer assistant to something closer to partners. Ethan arranged meetings with architectural firms, introducing Olivia as his project coordinator rather than his personal assistant. He shared his design philosophy during long evenings in the sunroom, teaching her to read blueprints and understand structural concepts that would help her represent his interests during his absence. For Olivia, the experience was exhilarating, intellectually stimulating in ways her previous responsibilities hadn't been, drawing on her natural empathy and aesthetic sensibility while challenging her to develop new skills. She found herself looking forward to their evening design sessions. When Ethan's passion for architecture emerged fully, his eyes alight with creative energy as he sketched concepts and explained technical details. On Friday evening, Olivia left early to prepare for a family dinner, a monthly tradition she maintained despite her demanding schedule. She returned to her family's modest home with mixed emotions, her mind still partially occupied with the community center designs. Her mother, Diana, was having a good day. Her chronic pain managed well enough that she stood at the kitchen counter preparing a salad when Olivia arrived. "There she is," Diana said warmly, her smile brightening a face still beautiful despite illness having etched premature lines around her eyes. "We were beginning to think you'd moved permanently into that mansion." Olivia kissed her mother's cheek, dropping her bag on a kitchen chair. "Sometimes it feels that way. The community center project has taken over everything." "You seem to be enjoying it, though," Diana observed with maternal perception. "I haven't seen you this engaged since your literature seminars in college." "It's challenging work," Olivia admitted, "and unexpectedly fulfilling. Ethan has an extraordinary vision for accessible design." Diana exchanged a knowing glance with Grace, who was setting the table. "Ethan, is it? Not Mr. Westbrook anymore." Olivia felt a blush warming her cheeks. "We're colleagues on this project. It would be awkward to maintain such formality." "MMHMM." Grace hummed skeptically, her 16-year-old perception uncomfortably acute. "Colleagues who spend every waking hour together. It's a professional relationship," Olivia insisted, though the flutter in her stomach whenever she thought of Ethan suggested more complex emotions than professional respect. "And anyway, he's leaving for Baltimore in 2 weeks." "Baltimore?" Jason asked, entering the kitchen with a stack of textbooks. "What's in Baltimore?" Olivia explained about the treatment program, watching her family's reactions closely. They had never met Ethan, knew him only through her stories and the generous salary that had eased their financial burdens. Yet their concerns seemed genuine. "6 months is a long time," Diana observed, placing the salad on the table. "Will you go with him?" "He's offered me the option," Olivia admitted. "I'd continue working on the community center project from there, coordinating with the Charleston team." "You should go," Jason said immediately. "It's an amazing opportunity." "But what about all of you? Mom's treatments, your tuition, Grace's college applications?" "We managed before you took this job," Diana interrupted gently. "We can manage while you're in Baltimore. This isn't just about a paycheck anymore, is it?" The question hung in the air, weighted with implications Olivia wasn't quite ready to face. "I don't know what you mean." Diana reached across the table, covering Olivia's hand with her own. "I think you do. I see the way your face lights up when you talk about this project. About him. There's something there, something important." "He's my boss, Mom. He's a person who's reconnecting with life after trauma," Diana countered. "And you're a part of that journey. That creates a powerful bond." Olivia sighed, unable to deny the truth in her mother's words. "Even if there were feelings, it's complicated. His life is so different from ours, and he has his own struggles to focus on." "Life is always complicated," Diana said wisely. "But connections like this, they don't come along every day. Don't dismiss it just because the timing isn't perfect or the circumstances aren't what you imagined." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Diana's words lingered in Olivia's mind. That night, lying in bed, she allowed herself to examine feelings she'd been carefully suppressing. Awareness of Ethan not just as her employer, but as a man whose strength and vulnerability had increasingly captivated her attention. It was unprofessional, potentially complicated, and absolutely not what she had expected when she accepted this position. Yet she couldn't deny the growing connection between them, a bond forged through shared work and mutual respect that had gradually evolved into something neither had anticipated. The annual Charleston Architectural Foundation Benefit Gala arrived the following week, presenting an opportunity to introduce the community center concept to potential supporters. Ethan had suggested they attend together. His first major public appearance since the accident and a significant step in his reemergence into Charleston society. Olivia spent considerable time preparing, selecting a simple but elegant emerald green dress that her mother had helped her find. As Marcus drove them to the historic Gibby's Museum of Art where the gala was being held, she noticed Ethan's hand gripping the armrest tightly, betraying tension that his composed expression concealed. "Nervous about tonight?" she asked quietly. He glanced at her, surprise flickering across his features at her perception. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who knows what to look for." She hesitated, then added gently, "It's your first major public appearance since the accident." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. The Charleston business community has a long memory and an unforgiving nature. Before the accident, they respected me for my strength and achievements. Now they'll see vulnerability instead of vision, pity instead of power. Every handshake, every glance will carry unspoken questions about whether I'm still capable of leading Westbrook Innovations. Olivia reached across the space between them, her hand coming to rest gently on his. The simple touch seemed to anchor him, drawing his gaze from the passing Charleston streets to her face. "They'll see a man who faced extraordinary challenges and emerged stronger," she said, her voice soft but certain. "They'll see the visionary who's creating spaces that will transform lives. The wheelchair doesn't define you, Ethan. Your resilience, your brilliance, your heart. That's what they'll remember after tonight." Something shifted in his expression, the tightness around his eyes softening, his shoulders relaxing almost imperceptibly. "You have an uncanny ability to see the best in people, even when they struggle to see it themselves." "It's a gift my father gave me," she replied with a small smile. "He always said that true character reveals itself not in moments of triumph, but in how we rise after falling." The limousine slowed as they approached the Gibby's Museum of Art, its classical columns illuminated against the evening sky. Through the tinted windows, they could see Charleston's elite ascending the steps. Women in evening gowns, men in tailored tuxedos, all gathering for an evening of philanthropy thinly veiled as social positioning. "Ready?" Olivia asked as Marcus came around to open the door. Ethan met her gaze, something vulnerable and honest in his expression. "With you beside me?" "Yes." The simple declaration, spoken with such sincerity, sent warmth spreading through Olivia's chest. She squeezed his hand once before releasing it, a gesture of support that conveyed more than words could express. Marcus efficiently deployed the wheelchair ramp, and within moments they were making their entrance. Ethan navigating his chair with characteristic precision, Olivia walking beside him with quiet confidence. The subtle murmur that rippled through the crowd at their appearance was impossible to miss, but Ethan held his head high, acknowledging greetings with the poised authority that had once defined his public persona. The grand ballroom shimmered with opulence, chandeliers casting sparkling light across marble floors, the air filled with the murmur of conversations and the delicate notes of a string quartet. Olivia remained close to Ethan's side, her emerald dress catching the light as they moved through the crowd. "Ethan, what a wonderful surprise." Cynthia Sterling approached them with genuine warmth, her gallery owner's eye taking in both Ethan's impeccable appearance and Olivia's elegant simplicity. "We've missed you at these gatherings. And Olivia, you look absolutely stunning." "Thank you, Cynthia," Ethan replied, his tone gracious despite the obvious strain of the social situation. "I wanted to support the Architectural Foundation and share some news about a project we've been developing." Cynthia's eyes widened with interest. "A new project? How exciting!" "Olivia has been instrumental in its development," Ethan said, his gaze shifting to her with unmistakable pride. "Perhaps she can provide some details." The unexpected invitation caught Olivia off guard. She had prepared to offer quiet support, not to deliver a presentation to potential investors. Yet she recognized the opportunity Ethan was offering, not just to promote the community center but to establish herself as his professional equal. Taking a deep breath, she described their vision for the community center, a space designed from the ground up with universal accessibility, combining innovative technology with thoughtful architecture to create an environment that empowered rather than limited. As she spoke, she noticed Ethan watching her with an expression of quiet admiration, his earlier anxiety replaced by evident pride. "This sounds remarkable," said a distinguished man with silver hair who had joined their circle. "I'm Richard Abernathy, chair of the city's Accessibility Committee. We've been advocating for exactly this kind of forward-thinking design in Charleston." "Mr. Abernathy," Ethan acknowledged, extending his hand. "Your reputation precedes you. We'd welcome your insights as the project develops." What followed was 30 minutes of productive conversation, with Abernathy offering connections to city officials, suggestions for navigating permit processes, and potential funding sources. By the time they moved on to greet other guests, they had gained not just a supporter but a valuable ally for the community center. "You were brilliant," Ethan murmured as they paused near one of the tall windows overlooking the museum gardens. "You articulated the vision better than I could have." "We make a good team," Olivia replied, her cheeks warming at his praise. "Your architectural expertise and my practical perspective complement each other." "More than compliment," he said, his voice dropping to ensure privacy. "You've transformed my initial concept into something far more meaningful, Olivia. You see the human elements I sometimes miss." The moment of connection was interrupted by a familiar voice that caused Ethan to stiffen beside her. "Ethan, I was beginning to think you'd become a recluse in that waterfront fortress of yours." Olivia turned to see a strikingly beautiful woman approaching them, her designer gown and flawless makeup creating an aura of polished perfection. She recognized her immediately from photographs she'd seen during her research on Ethan, Catherine Pierce, the fiancée who had returned his ring during his hospital recovery. "Catherine," Ethan acknowledged, his composure impeccable despite the tension evident in his shoulders. "I didn't realize you were back in Charleston." "Just for the season," Catherine replied, her gaze briefly assessing Olivia before dismissing her as unimportant. "Daddy's considering a run for governor, so we're making the rounds." She leaned closer to Ethan, lowering her voice to an intimate register. "You're looking well. Recovery seems to agree with you." The subtle emphasis on recovery carried implications that made Olivia's protective instincts flare. Before she could respond, however, Ethan's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own in a gesture that appeared casual but felt profoundly significant. "Life agrees with me," he corrected smoothly. "Catherine, this is Olivia Morgan, my partner in the Community Center project." Olivia, Catherine Pierce, an old acquaintance. The deliberate downgrading of their former relationship was not lost on Catherine, whose perfect smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "How lovely to meet you, Olivia. I'm sure Ethan keeps you very busy." "The work is demanding but fulfilling," Olivia replied, matching Catherine's polished tone while squeezing Ethan's hand in silent support. "Especially when you're passionate about the mission." Catherine's gaze dropped to their clasped hands, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing her features before her social mask reasserted itself. "Well, I won't keep you. Ethan, we should catch up properly while I'm in town. I'll have my assistant call yours." As Catherine glided away to join another conversation, Olivia became acutely aware that Ethan was still holding her hand, his thumb tracing small circles against her skin in a gesture that seemed both absent-minded and intimate. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. Ethan's expression was contemplative rather than distressed. "Surprisingly, yes. 6 months ago, seeing her would have reopened wounds I wasn't ready to face. Now." He looked down at their joined hands, then back to Olivia's face. "Now I find myself grateful for unanswered prayers." The evening continued with a mixture of professional networking and navigating social undercurrents. Olivia watched with quiet pride as Ethan engaged confidently with former colleagues and potential investors, his natural charisma and intelligence reasserting themselves despite the physical limitations that had once seemed so defining. Their momentum was briefly interrupted when an elderly woman with a patrician bearing approached them, her disapproving gaze moving between Ethan and Olivia. "Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "So good to see you back in circulation. Though I must say, I was surprised to see you here with an assistant." The subtle emphasis on assistant was unmistakable, a clear attempt to diminish Olivia's presence and emphasize her perceived social inferiority. Olivia stiffened, prepared to defend herself, but Ethan responded before she could speak. "Eleanor, allow me to introduce Olivia Morgan, my project coordinator and an invaluable partner in developing the Westbrook Community Innovation Center," he said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make the older woman blink in surprise. "Her vision and dedication are essential to this project's success." He placed his hand possessively on Olivia's arm, his gaze daring Eleanor to challenge his assertion. The socialite seemed taken aback by his firm defense, her expression shifting from condescension to something closer to confusion. Of course, Ethan, she stammered, recovering quickly. How wonderful that you're supporting such a worthy cause. We all wish you the best in your recovery. She offered a strained smile before moving away, leaving Olivia and Ethan alone. You didn't have to do that, Olivia said quietly, her heart swelling with gratitude for his unwavering support. Yes, I did, Ethan replied, his voice firm. You deserve recognition for your contributions, and I won't allow anyone to diminish your value to the project or to me. As the evening drew to a close, they made their way back to the waiting limousine, both aware that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. The professional boundaries that had once defined their interactions had blurred, revealing deeper currents of connection neither had fully acknowledged until tonight. The ride home passed in comfortable silence, both processing the evening's events and their implications. As they approached the mansion, the garden lights illuminated the transformation they had created together, from neglected space to vibrant sanctuary, a physical manifestation of the healing that had occurred within its boundaries. Thank you for tonight, Ethan said as Marcus helped him from the car. For standing beside me. For seeing possibilities I couldn't see for myself. That's what partners do, Olivia replied softly. They hold the vision when the other can't quite believe in it. Their eyes met in the gentle darkness, a moment balanced on the edge of something profound. Then Ethan reached for her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture both old-fashioned and achingly tender. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and withdrawing a small package wrapped in simple silver paper. I was going to wait until before I left for Baltimore, but tonight seems right. Olivia unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound journal, its cover soft and supple beneath her fingers. Opening it, she found a silver inscription on the first page, to new beginnings and healing hearts. Ethan. Tears welled in her eyes, her heart overflowing with emotion. It's beautiful, she whispered, her voice catching. Thank you. I thought you might use it to record your thoughts about the community center, he said, his voice gentle. Or perhaps other thoughts that might arise while I'm away. The implication hung between them, unspoken but unmistakable. This journal wasn't just for professional notes, it was a bridge across the distance that would soon separate them, a place to capture feelings too new and fragile to fully express. I'll write in it every day, she promised, holding it close to her heart. Ethan's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch featherlight yet grounding. Good night, Olivia, he murmured. Dream well. As Marcus drove her home, Olivia gazed out at the Charleston night, her fingers tracing the inscription in the journal, her heart opening to possibilities she had never anticipated when she first walked through the mansion's imposing doors. Like their garden, something beautiful was growing between them, something that required patience, care, and courage to fully bloom. The morning after the gala, Olivia arrived at the mansion to find a bouquet of fresh wildflowers waiting on her desk. The same varieties that had spontaneously bloomed in their garden. No note accompanied them, but none was needed. The gesture spoke volumes about how far Ethan had come from the bitter, isolated man she'd first encountered 3 months ago. She was arranging the flowers in a crystal vase when her phone rang. The screen displayed her mother's name, and Olivia felt an immediate twist of concern. Diana rarely called during work hours unless something was wrong. Mom, is everything okay? Her mother's voice came through strained and breathless. I'm at Charleston Memorial. Don't panic. But I had an episode this morning. The neighbor drove me in. Olivia's hand tightened on the phone. What kind of episode? Where's Grace? Does Jason know? Grace is at school. I didn't want to worry her. And Jason has that important exam today. Diana paused, and Olivia could hear the subtle beeping of hospital monitors in the background. The doctors are running tests. It's probably nothing serious, just a flare-up. But they both knew Diana's flare-ups had become increasingly severe over the past year, each one leaving her weaker than before. The experimental treatment they'd been saving for, the one Olivia's salary from Westbrook had finally put within reach, wasn't scheduled to begin for another month. I'm coming right now, Olivia said, already gathering her purse and keys. Sweetheart, you don't need to. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't argue with me, Mom. She ended the call and turned to find Ethan in the doorway of her office, his expression concerned. Family emergency? My mother's in the hospital, Olivia explained, her professional composure slipping as worry took hold. I need to go. Of course. Ethan wheeled closer, his brow furrowed. Is there anything I can do? The simple offer of help, so different from the demanding employer she'd first met, touched Olivia deeply. Thank you, but no. I'll keep you updated about when I'll be back." "Don't worry about that," he said firmly. "Your family comes first. Take whatever time you need." She nodded gratefully and hurried out, her mind already racing with contingency plans. Grace would need to be picked up from school. Jason would need support despite his exam. The mortgage payment was due in 3 days. The refrigerator at home was nearly empty. Each practical concern helped distract her from the deeper fear that had taken root in her heart, that her mother's condition might be deteriorating faster than they'd anticipated. Charleston Memorial Hospital bustled with midday activity as Olivia navigated the familiar corridors to the emergency department. She'd spent too many hours in these halls over the past year, watching her mother endure tests, treatments, and the crushing disappointment of each failed therapy. She found Diana in a curtained bay, looking small and vulnerable against the stark white sheets, and 4 dripped steadily into her arm, and a pulse oximeter glowed on her finger. Despite her pallor, Diana managed to smile when she saw her daughter. "You didn't need to rush over," she chided gently. "Of course I did." Olivia took her mother's hand, noting with concern how cool it felt. "What are the doctors saying?" "Dr. Patel is reviewing my blood work now. He mentioned something about my inflammatory markers being elevated." Diana squeezed Olivia's hand weakly. "It's probably just another flare-up. I'll be home by dinner." But Dr. Patel's expression when he arrived 30 minutes later suggested otherwise. The specialist had been managing Diana's case for over a year, his kind eyes and straightforward manner a comfort during difficult consultations. Today, however, his face held a gravity that made Olivia's stomach clench. "The test results indicate a significant progression of your condition, Mrs. Morgan," he explained, his voice gentle but frank. "The inflammation is affecting your kidneys now, which explains the symptoms you experienced this morning." "What does that mean for her treatment plan?" Olivia asked, struggling to maintain composure. Dr. Patel hesitated, glancing between mother and daughter. "I believe we need to accelerate our timeline. The experimental protocol we've been discussing. Ideally, we'd start immediately rather than waiting another month." "But the insurance approval," Diana began, "won't come through that quickly," Dr. Patel finished for her. "I understand the financial constraints, but medically speaking, sooner would be significantly better than later." The implications hung heavily in the small space. The treatment cost $47,000 for the initial phase, money they had been carefully saving from Olivia's salary, but hadn't quite accumulated. They were still about $12,000 short. "We'll figure it out," Olivia said with more confidence than she felt. "How soon could you start if we gave the go-ahead?" "I could schedule the first infusion for Monday if we confirm by tomorrow afternoon." Dr. Patel made a note in Diana's chart. "In the meantime, we'll keep you overnight for observation and adjust your current medications to manage the kidney inflammation." After the doctor left, Diana turned worried eyes to her daughter. "Olivia, we don't have that kind of money yet. I can wait another month." "The doctor doesn't think you should wait, and neither do I." Olivia's mind was already calculating possibilities. A personal loan, perhaps, or an advance on her salary. "Let me worry about the finances. You focus on resting." She stayed until Grace arrived after school, her sister's dark eyes wide with concern despite Olivia's reassurances. Together they created a semblance of normalcy in the sterile hospital room. Grace working on homework at the bedside table, Olivia making calls to arrange the practical details of their disrupted lives, Diana dozing intermittently as medication flowed through her veins. It was nearly 8 o'clock when Olivia finally left, promising to return first thing in the morning. The hospital corridors seemed endless, her footsteps echoing on the polished floors as fatigue and worry weighed heavily on her shoulders. She was so preoccupied that she almost collided with a man in the main lobby, a man in a wheelchair with unmistakably familiar features. "Ethan?" she gasped, momentarily certain she was hallucinating from stress and exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" Ethan Westbrook looked uncharacteristically uncertain, his usual commanding presence softened by the hospital setting. "Marcus mentioned you hadn't left all day. I thought you might need dinner, at least." He gestured to a bag from Charleston's finest Italian restaurant sitting on his lap. The unexpected kindness brought tears to Olivia's eyes. Tears she'd been holding back all day while being strong for her mother and sister. Thank you. But you didn't need to come all this way. I wanted to, he said simply. How is your mother? The genuine concern in his voice broke through the last of Olivia's professional reserve. In halting sentences, she explained Diana's condition, the doctor's recommendation, and the financial shortfall they faced. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he nodded once, decisively. Let's discuss this somewhere more comfortable. The hospital cafeteria should still be open. In the nearly empty cafeteria, over containers of gnocchi and tiramisu that Olivia could barely taste despite her hunger, Ethan made a proposal that left her speechless. I'd like to advance you 6 months' salary, he said, his tone making it clear this was not charity but a business arrangement. You can use it for your mother's treatment, and we'll adjust your compensation accordingly over the next year. Olivia stared at him, stunned by the offer. Ethan, that's incredibly generous, but it's practical, he interrupted. You're valuable to Westbrook Innovations and to the Community Center project. Your performance will suffer if you're consumed with worry about your mother. This solution benefits everyone. His framing of the offer as mutually beneficial rather than charitable was deliberate. She knew, preserving her dignity while providing the help she desperately needed. Still, accepting such a significant financial arrangement felt like crossing a line in their evolving relationship. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say yes, Ethan replied, his eyes holding hers steadily. Let me do this, Olivia. Please. The simple please, from a man who rarely requested rather than commanded, tipped the balance. Olivia nodded, blinking back tears of relief and gratitude. Yes, thank you. Ethan's expression softened. Good. I'll have the funds transferred to your account tomorrow morning. Now eat your dinner before it gets cold. Hospital cafeteria chairs are not designed for extended comfort. The gentle humor, so rare from him, brought a smile to Olivia's face despite her exhaustion. As they shared the meal, their conversation shifted to lighter topics: the garden's progress, Grace's college aspirations, a book they'd both recently read. For those brief moments, the hospital and its worries receded, replaced by the simple comfort of connection. Later, as Marcus drove them back to Olivia's house to pick up necessities for her mother, Ethan surprised her again by asking to come inside. I've heard so much about your family, he explained. It seems strange that I've never met them or seen where you live. Olivia hesitated, suddenly conscious of the vast disparity between his waterfront mansion and her family's modest bungalow. It's nothing special, just an old family home that needs more repairs than we can afford. I'd still like to see it, he said simply. If you're comfortable with that. The house sat on a quiet street lined with live oaks draped in Spanish moss. Its weathered clapboard exterior and sagging front porch spoke of generations of love and limited resources. As Marcus helped Ethan navigate the 3 steps to the porch, a stark reminder of how inaccessible most homes were for wheelchair users, Olivia felt a strange blend of pride and self-consciousness. My grandfather built this house in 1962, she explained as they entered the small living room. Dad grew up here and then brought Mom here after they married. It's been in the family ever since. Ethan wheeled slowly through the space, taking in the worn but clean furniture, the bookshelves overflowing with well-loved volumes, the family photos covering nearly every available surface. His expression was not pitying, as she had feared, but appreciative, as if he recognized the richness that had nothing to do with financial wealth. It feels like a home, he said finally, his voice quiet. My house, it's just a structure. This is different. Before Olivia could respond, the front door opened and Jason entered, his tall frame stooped with exhaustion after a long day of classes and work. He stopped short at the sight of Ethan, confusion evident on his face. Jason, this is Ethan Westbrook, my boss, Olivia said quickly. Ethan, my brother Jason. Recognition dawned in Jason's eyes as he stepped forward to shake Ethan's hand. It's an honor to meet you, sir. Your work in adaptive technology is revolutionary. I'm using your neural interface design as a case study in my engineering ethics class. Ethan looked genuinely pleased by this unexpected connection. I'd be interested in hearing your analysis. The ethical implications of that technology are still evolving. What Olivia had anticipated as an awkward encounter transformed into an animated discussion between her brother and Ethan about technological innovation and accessibility. She excused herself to pack a bag for her mother, listening to their voices from the hallway with a sense of worlds colliding in ways she couldn't have imagined. When she returned, she found them in deep conversation about Jason's senior project, a modified drone design intended to assist search and rescue operations in disaster zones. The programming is solid, Jason was explaining, but I'm having trouble with the weight-to-battery ratio. The prototype can only fly for about 20 minutes before needing a recharge. Have you considered graphene-based power cells? Ethan asked, his expression animated in a way Olivia rarely saw outside their garden discussions. Westbrook's R&D department has been developing a prototype that's 30% lighter than conventional lithium-ion batteries with double the capacity. Jason's eyes widened. That would be perfect, but that technology isn't commercially available yet. It will be in about 6 months, Ethan replied. But I could arrange for you to test a prototype now if you're interested. We're always looking for real-world applications to refine the design. The offer, made casually but with genuine interest, left Jason momentarily speechless. That would be incredible. Thank you. Olivia watched the exchange with a swelling heart, seeing her brother's brilliance recognized by someone whose opinion carried genuine weight in the technological world. It was a gift beyond measure, not charity, but opportunity based on merit. Later, as they prepared to leave, Jason pulled Olivia aside while Ethan waited on the porch with Marcus. He's not what I expected, her brother admitted quietly. From what you'd said about him being demanding and difficult. He's changed, Olivia replied, glancing through the window to where Ethan sat in his wheelchair, gazing thoughtfully at the massive live oak that dominated their small front yard. Or maybe he's letting more people see who he really is beneath the CEO facade. He looks at you differently, Jason observed with the directness of a sibling. When you're not watching. Like you're something precious he's afraid of breaking. The observation sent warmth spreading through Olivia's chest, but she shook her head dismissively. We work closely together. There's mutual respect, that's all. Jason's skeptical expression made it clear he wasn't convinced, but he didn't press the issue. Well, whatever it is, I like him. And not just because he offered me access to revolutionary battery technology. The following days established a new rhythm to Olivia's life, mornings at the hospital with her mother, afternoons at the mansion working on the community center project. Evenings divided between family responsibilities and preparation for Ethan's upcoming treatment in Baltimore. The 6-month salary advance had been transferred to her account as promised, enabling Diana's treatment to begin on schedule. What Olivia hadn't anticipated was Ethan's personal involvement in her family's situation. He arranged for a specialist from Johns Hopkins to consult on Diana's case via video conference. He offered the mansion's guest cottage to Grace and Jason during Diana's hospitalization, ensuring they had comfortable accommodations close to Olivia. He even sent his personal chef to prepare meals that could be easily reheated, alleviating one practical concern from Olivia's overflowing plate. Each gesture was presented pragmatically, framed as logical solutions rather than charity, respecting the pride that had sustained the Morgan family through years of challenges. Yet the cumulative effect was transformative, not just practically but emotionally, creating a support system that allowed Olivia to breathe for the first time in months. One evening, as she worked late in the sunroom reviewing architectural plans for the community center, Ethan joined her with 2 glasses of wine and a contemplative expression. "How is your mother today?" he asked, placing one glass beside her drawings. "Better," Olivia replied, gratitude warming her voice. "The new treatment seems to be working. Her inflammation markers are down and she had enough energy to argue with the nurse about hospital food." Ethan smiled. "Arguing with authority figures seems to run in the family." "I have no idea what you're talking about," she replied with mock innocence, taking a sip of the wine, a rich Cabernet that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. "I'm the model of compliance and agreeability." "Of course you are. That's why you completely reorganized my filing system your second week, ignored my explicit instructions about the garden layout, and regularly challenged my design decisions on this project." His tone held no rancor, only a warmth that had become increasingly common in their interactions. Olivia smiled, recognizing the affectionate teasing for what it was. "Someone needs to save you from your worst instincts," she countered. "Especially your bizarre attachment to right angles and minimalist design." "Bizarre?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "I prefer to call it sophisticated." "Sterile, more like." Olivia gestured to the plans spread before them. "Which is why I've suggested these modifications to the community center's central atrium. More curves, more natural elements. A space that feels organic rather than imposed." Ethan studied the drawings, his expression shifting from playful to thoughtful. You have good instincts, Olivia. These changes, they improve the human experience of the space. The simple acknowledgement meant more coming from him than elaborate praise from anyone else would have. Thank you. That means a lot. He nodded, his gaze moving from the plans to her face. Your perspective has been invaluable not just on this project, but in many areas I hadn't expected. The conversation hovered on the edge of something deeper, something neither had directly addressed despite the evolving nature of their relationship. Olivia felt her heart quicken as Ethan's eyes held hers, the moment suspended between professional collaboration and personal connection. The chime of her phone broke the spell. A text from Jason. * Mom asking for you. Nothing urgent, but she's restless. * I should go, Olivia said, gathering her things. Mom's having a difficult evening. Ethan nodded, understanding without need for explanation. Of course, Marcus can drive you. Thank you for everything, Ethan. My family and I, we couldn't have managed without your help. He shook his head, discomfort flickering across his features at her gratitude. You would have found a way. You're remarkably resourceful. Maybe, she acknowledged, but your support has made an immeasurable difference. I just want you to know how much we appreciate it. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his expression unusually vulnerable. Before you came to work here, my life was empty, focused on what I'd lost, not what remained possible. Your family has reminded me of what matters beyond business success or physical capability. He paused, choosing his words carefully. So perhaps the appreciation should be mutual. The simple statement, delivered with quiet sincerity, touched Olivia deeply. On impulse, she leaned down and pressed a kiss to his cheek. A brief, gentle contact that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through her. Good night, Ethan, she said softly, straightening before he could respond. I'll see you tomorrow. As Marcus drove her to the hospital, Olivia's mind replayed the moment in the sunroom, the almost confession in Ethan's words, the unexpected tenderness of her response. Something was shifting between them, evolving beyond professional boundaries into territory neither had anticipated when she first accepted the position as his assistant. The hospital corridors were quiet as evening settled into night, visiting hours drawing to a close. Olivia found her mother awake but tired, the new treatment taxing her body even as it fought the underlying disease. There you are, Diana said, her smile brightening her wan features. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten your old mother for those fancy architectural plans. Olivia kissed her forehead, settling into the chair beside the bed. Never. How are you feeling? Like I've been run over by a truck. But the doctor says that's normal with this treatment. Diana studied her daughter's face with maternal perception. You look different tonight. Something happened with that handsome boss of yours. Mom, Olivia protested, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Ethan is my employer. That's all. Diana's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. Employers don't usually arrange consultations with Johns Hopkins specialists or send their personal chefs to make sure a family is well fed. He's being kind because of everything that's happening with you. It's not personal. Ma'am. Diana reached for her daughter's hand, her touch still reassuringly strong despite her illness. Olivia, I've watched you put your life on hold for this family since your father died. You've carried burdens no 24-year-old should have to bear, and you've done it without complaint. It's what family does, Olivia said simply. Yes, but it's time for you to think about your own happiness too. Diana's eyes were serious despite her gentle tone. I see how you light up when you talk about this community center project, about working with Ethan. There's something there, something important. Olivia sighed, unable to deny the truth in her mother's observation. Even if there were feelings. It's complicated, Mom. He's my boss. He's from a completely different world. And he's about to leave for Baltimore for 6 months. Life is always complicated, Diana replied with the wisdom of experience. But connections like this, they don't come along every day. Don't dismiss it just because the timing isn't perfect or the circumstances aren't what you imagined. The conversation shifted to other topics. Grace's college applications, Jason's excitement about the battery technology Ethan had arranged for his project, the latest hospital gossip Diana had collected from nurses and orderlies. Yet her mother's words lingered in Olivia's mind, echoing thoughts she'd been carefully avoiding. Later that night, as she prepared for bed in the guest cottage Ethan had insisted her family use during Diana's hospitalization, Olivia found herself drawn to the window overlooking the main house. A single light burned in Ethan's study, evidence that he too was awake despite the late hour. On impulse, she reached for her phone and typed a simple message. *, thank you for the wine and conversation earlier. Sleep well, Ethan. *. His response came almost immediately. *, the pleasure was mine. Your insights improve every project, including my perspective. Rest well, Olivia. *. The simple exchange, mundane on its surface, carried undercurrents that made her heart beat faster. She fell asleep with her phone beside her pillow, a smile lingering on her lips despite the challenges that still lay ahead. The following week brought a whirlwind of activity as Diana's condition stabilized enough for her to return home and Ethan's departure for Baltimore approached. The community center plans were finalized, contractors selected, and a project timeline established that would allow work to progress during Ethan's absence. Olivia found herself simultaneously preparing for her mother's homecoming and organizing the logistics of potentially relocating to Baltimore for part of Ethan's treatment period. The dual focus kept her practical mind occupied, preventing deeper contemplation of the emotional implications of these changes. It was Jason who finally forced the issue, cornering her in the kitchen of the guest cottage as she packed their belongings for the move back home. "So when were you planning to tell us about Baltimore?" he asked, leaning against the counter with arms crossed. Olivia paused in her methodical folding of towels. "I haven't decided about Baltimore yet. There are a lot of factors to consider." "Like what?" "Mom's doing better. Grace and I can manage the house. Your salary is already advanced for 6 months." He studied her with the direct gaze that reminded her so much of their father. "What's really holding you back?" The question cut through her carefully constructed rationalizations. What was holding her back? Not practical concerns, those could be managed. Not professional obligations, the community center could progress with her oversight from either Charleston or Baltimore. "I'm afraid," she admitted finally, the truth surprising her even as she spoke it. "Afraid of what it means that I want to go with him. Afraid of what might happen if I do. Afraid of how much it would hurt if you let yourself care about him and then lose him?" Jason finished gently. Olivia nodded, unexpected tears pricking her eyes. "We lost Dad so suddenly, then almost lost Mom. I'm not sure I can risk opening myself to that kind of pain again." Jason moved closer, wrapping an arm around his sister's shoulders. At 19, he had grown into a young man with their father's height and their mother's gentle wisdom. "Liv, you've spent the past year protecting all of us. Financially, emotionally, practically. You've been our rock. But Dad wouldn't want you to stop living because you're afraid of losing people you love." "It's not that simple," she protested. "It never is," he agreed. "But I've seen how you are around Ethan, and how he looks at you when you're not watching. That kind of connection, it's worth the risk, isn't it?" Before she could respond, her phone chimed with a message from Ethan. *, need your input on something important. Can you come to the main house when convenient? *, go, Jason said, noticing her hesitation. "I'll finish packing here." Olivia found Ethan in the garden, his wheelchair positioned beside the stone bench near the water feature they had designed together. The autumn sun cast dappled shadows through the oak branches, creating a peaceful sanctuary that bore little resemblance to the neglected space she had first encountered. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, settling beside him on the bench. Ethan nodded, his expression unusually serious. "I've been thinking about Baltimore, about the treatment protocol and what it means for various aspects of my life." "Having second thoughts?" Olivia asked, concern evident in her voice. "Not about the treatment itself," he clarified, "but about what happens during those 6 months. Specifically about your role." Her heart sank, assuming he was about to suggest she remain in Charleston rather than accompany him as previously discussed. I understand if you've reconsidered. The community center can certainly progress with me coordinating from here and That's not it, Ethan interrupted, his hand moving to cover hers where it rested on the bench between them. Quite the opposite, in fact. I want you to come to Baltimore, Olivia, but not just as my assistant or project coordinator. She stared at him, uncertain of his meaning. Then as what? Ethan's expression softened, vulnerability evident in his usually guarded features. As someone who matters to me. As someone I've come to care for in ways that have nothing to do with professional capability. The confession, delivered with such careful precision, made Olivia's heart race. Ethan, you don't need to respond now, he said quickly. I understand this complicates our working relationship. I understand if you feel it's inappropriate or unwelcome. But before we leave for Baltimore, I needed you to know that my feelings for you have evolved beyond professional admiration or friendship. Olivia was silent for a long moment, absorbing the magnitude of his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. I've been trying very hard not to acknowledge similar feelings. Hope flickered in Ethan's eyes. Why? Because it's complicated. Because you're my boss and I need this job. Because you're leaving for 6 months of intensive medical treatment that should be your focus. Because we come from completely different worlds. She paused, meeting his gaze directly. Because caring about people means risking loss, and I've had enough loss to last a lifetime. Ethan nodded slowly, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. All valid concerns. Logical, practical reasons to maintain professional boundaries. Yes, she agreed. And yet, he prompted, sensing her unspoken thoughts. Olivia smiled despite herself. And yet, here we are. In this garden we created together. Having this conversation anyway. The tension in Ethan's shoulders eased visibly at her words, a genuine smile transforming his features in a way that still caught her breath. Perhaps that's our answer then, he said softly, his fingers gently tightening around hers. Some connections are worth pursuing despite every logical argument against them. They defy practical considerations and remind us that the heart rarely follows the mind's careful calculations. The November morning arrived with a gentle chill that whispered of winter's approach. Olivia stood at the edge of the garden, watching as golden sunlight spilled across the Charleston harbor, painting the water in shades of amber and rose. In the 2 weeks since her conversation with Ethan, since that moment when they'd acknowledged the feelings growing between them, a delicate balance had emerged. Their professional collaboration continued with renewed energy, but now tender moments punctuated their days. His hand lingering on hers when passing documents, shared meals as twilight settled over the garden, conversations that stretched late into the evening, revealing layers of themselves previously kept hidden. Olivia wrapped her cardigan tighter against the morning breeze, savoring this moment of solitude before the day's demands began. The community center plans were finalized, contractors selected, groundbreaking scheduled for the following week, just days before Ethan's departure for Baltimore. The timing was deliberate, giving him something positive to focus on during the challenging months of treatment ahead. You're out early. She turned to find Ethan wheeling toward her along the stone path they'd created together, steam rising from 2 mugs balanced carefully on his lap. His hair was still damp from the shower, his face freshly shaven, but shadows beneath his eyes betrayed another difficult night. Couldn't sleep, she admitted, accepting the coffee he offered. Too many thoughts. About Baltimore? He asked, positioning his wheelchair beside the wrought iron bench where she sat. About everything. She took a sip, appreciating the rich blend he'd prepared exactly as she preferred. 1 sugar, splash of cream. The community center, my mother's treatment, your therapy program. Us. The last word hung between them, weighted with unspoken questions and possibilities neither had fully articulated. Ethan's expression softened as he reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become comfortingly familiar. Having second thoughts? His voice remained steady, though she detected the subtle tension beneath. Not second thoughts, she clarified. Just awareness of how complicated this all is. You're my boss, Ethan. The salary that's keeping my family afloat comes from your company. And now we're about to spend 6 months in Baltimore together while you undergo intensive treatment. It's a lot to navigate. I understand, he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles against her palm. If you want to reconsider the arrangements, I don't, she interrupted, meeting his gaze directly. That's what scares me. Logic tells me to maintain professional distance, to protect myself from potential complications. But my heart, she paused, gathering courage for the admission. My heart wants to be with you through whatever comes next. The vulnerability in her voice seemed to touch something deep within him. Ethan leaned forward, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek with unexpected tenderness. Olivia Morgan, he said softly, you've rebuilt my garden, reorganized my filing system, and completely upended my carefully structured existence. And somehow, in the process, you've made me believe in possibilities I'd given up on. She smiled despite the emotion tightening her throat. Is that a complaint or a compliment, Mr. Westbrook? Definitely a compliment. His answering smile transformed his features, erasing the lines of pain and worry that had become so familiar. Though I still maintain that alphabetical organization is superior to your bizarre categorical system. Their laughter broke the morning stillness. A shared moment of lightness before responsibility reclaimed them. Olivia glanced at her watch, reluctantly withdrawing her hand from his. I should get started on those press releases for the groundbreaking, she said. And you have a video conference with the Baltimore medical team at 9. Ethan nodded, though regret flickered across his face at the interruption of their moment. Dinner tonight? I thought we could review the final contractor agreements together. It's a date, she replied, then blushed at the implication. I mean, I know what you mean, he said, his eyes warm with understanding. And I'd like it to be exactly that. A date. No work discussions, no medical updates, no family crises. Just us. The simple suggestion, so normal, yet so significant given their complicated circumstances, sent warmth spreading through her chest. I'd like that too. The morning unfolded with its usual rhythm of meetings, calls, and project coordination. Olivia was reviewing the community center budget in her office when her phone chimed with a text from Claire Wilson, Westbrook Innovations HR Director. * need to see you this afternoon. 2 p.m. in my office. Please confirm. *. The unexpected message sent a ripple of unease through her. In her experience, unscheduled HR meetings rarely signaled positive developments. She replied with a brief confirmation, then continued with her work, though the looming meeting cast a shadow over her concentration. At precisely 2 p.m., Olivia arrived at Westbrook Innovations headquarters in downtown Charleston. A sleek glass tower overlooking the harbor, its modern architecture reflecting Ethan's aesthetic sensibilities. Claire Wilson met her in the executive reception area, her tailored suit and carefully neutral expression providing no clues about the purpose of their meeting. Thank you for coming in, Olivia, Claire said, leading her to a small conference room. I appreciate your promptness. Once the door closed behind them, Claire placed a manila folder on the table between them. I'll be direct, she began, her tone professionally detached. A concern has been raised about the nature of your relationship with Ethan Westbrook. The statement hung in the air, its implications immediately clear despite the careful phrasing. Olivia maintained her composure through sheer force of will. I see. May I ask who raised this concern? That's confidential, Claire replied, but I can tell you that photographs were submitted showing what could be interpreted as inappropriate physical contact between you and Mr. Westbrook at the Architectural Foundation Gala. Olivia's mind flashed to that evening. Ethan taking her hand as Catherine approached, the kiss on her cheek as they said goodnight. Moments that had felt natural and appropriate in context now reframed as potential misconduct. Mr. Westbrook and I have developed a professional relationship while working closely together, she said carefully. Any physical contact has been within normal boundaries. Claire's expression remained neutral. Olivia, I want to be clear that you're not being accused of anything improper. However, Westbrook Innovations has strict policies regarding relationships between supervisors and their direct reports. These policies exist to protect both parties and the company. I understand the policies, Olivia replied, and I assure you that Mr. Westbrook has always maintained appropriate professional conduct. The issue isn't just about conduct, Claire explained, opening the folder to reveal printed emails and calendar entries. It's about perception and potential conflicts of interest. Your role has expanded significantly beyond your original job description. You've been given unusual authority over high-value projects. Your compensation was recently adjusted in a non-standard manner. Each point landed like a physical blow, transforming what Olivia had experienced as natural professional growth into something that could appear suspicious from the outside. The salary advance for her mother's medical treatment, reframed in this context, seemed particularly damning. Those developments occurred because I demonstrated capability and earned Mr. Westbrook's professional trust, she said, struggling to keep defensive anger from her voice. Claire nodded, her expression softening slightly. I believe that's true. Your performance reviews have been exceptional. But you must understand how this situation could be perceived, especially given Mr. Westbrook's position and the company's public profile. What exactly are you suggesting, Claire? Olivia asked directly. The board has expressed concern about potential impropriety or favoritism. With Mr. Westbrook's treatment in Baltimore approaching, they feel it would be appropriate to establish clearer boundaries. Claire hesitated before continuing. They're suggesting you remain in Charleston during his treatment, managing projects remotely rather than relocating with him. The recommendation, clearly a directive despite its careful framing, struck Olivia with unexpected force. The plans they had made, the careful balance they had negotiated between professional collaboration and personal connection, now threatened by corporate policy and unnamed accusations. Has Ethan been informed of this recommendation? She asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first. Given the sensitivity of the situation, Olivia nodded, gathering her thoughts. I appreciate your directness, Claire. I'll need some time to consider the implications for my role and the projects I'm currently managing. Of course, Claire replied, closing the folder. Take whatever time you need. But the board would like a decision before Mr. Westbrook's departure next week. The meeting concluded with professional pleasantries that did nothing to soften the impact of its content. Olivia left the building in a daze, the bright November sunshine incongruous with the storm of emotions brewing within her. Rather than returning immediately to the mansion, she found herself walking toward the waterfront park, needing space and perspective before facing Ethan. The harbor breeze carried the scent of salt and diesel as cargo ships moved through the channel, continuing their journeys regardless of human dramas unfolding on shore. Olivia settled on a bench facing the water, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. Remaining in Charleston while Ethan underwent treatment in Baltimore made practical sense from a corporate perspective. It would silence any whispers about impropriety, protect the company's reputation, and establish clear professional boundaries. It would also sever the deepening connection between them at a critical juncture, leaving Ethan to face 6 months of grueling treatment without the support system they had carefully constructed. Her phone vibrated with a message from Ethan. Asterisk, how did the meeting go? Should I be concerned? Asterisk. The simple question deserved a more complex answer than she could provide via text. Asterisk, we need to talk. I'll be back in an hour. Asterisk. His response came immediately. I'll be here. The drive back to the mansion gave Olivia time to organize her thoughts, to separate emotional reaction from practical reality. By the time Marcus admitted her through the security gate, she had reached a tentative decision, one that prioritized professional integrity while acknowledging the personal cost. She found Ethan in his office, his expression carefully neutral though concern shadowed his eyes. Tell me, he said simply as she entered. Olivia related the meeting's content without embellishment, watching his face darken as understanding dawned. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair with controlled tension. Who submitted these photographs? He finally asked, voice dangerously quiet. Claire wouldn't say, but given the timing and context, she hesitated, reluctant to voice her suspicion. Catherine, Ethan concluded, the name sharp with certainty. This has her fingerprints all over it. The board involvement, the timing, the subtle threat to my position. Does it matter who initiated it? Olivia asked, The concerns exist regardless of their source. It matters because it reveals motivation, he replied, wheeling closer to where she stood. This isn't about corporate policy or professional boundaries. It's about control, specifically, controlling me through the one relationship that has become significant to me. The assessment was likely accurate, but Olivia recognized the danger in focusing on perceived attacks rather than addressing the underlying issue. Ethan, regardless of motivation, we need to consider the implications. Your position as CEO, the community center project, your treatment protocol, all could be complicated by the perception of impropriety between us. So what are you suggesting? His voice held a new edge, a defensive note she recognized from their earliest interactions. That we pretend there's nothing between us? That you remain in Charleston while I go to Baltimore alone? I'm suggesting we be strategic, she replied calmly. The board's concern centers on my reporting directly to you while potentially having a personal relationship. There are organizational solutions that could address that concern. Ethan's expression shifted from defensive to thoughtful. Such as, I could transition to the community center project full-time, reporting to the project director rather than to you directly. It would create appropriate separation in the reporting structure while allowing me to continue the work we've started. And Baltimore? Olivia hesitated, the practical solution warring with her personal desires. I think it might be best if I remain in Charleston initially. I could visit regularly for project coordination, but maintaining separate primary locations would reinforce the professional boundaries. The suggestion hung between them, logical but emotionally unsatisfying. Ethan's expression closed, the vulnerability she had grown accustomed to replaced by a mask of professional detachment. I see, he said finally, a practical solution that satisfies corporate policy while maintaining project continuity. Very efficient, Ms. Morgan. The formal address stung more than she had anticipated. Ethan, this isn't what I want. It's what seems necessary given the circumstances. What you want, he repeated, his voice low and intense. And what is that, exactly? Because from where I sit, it seems remarkably convenient that corporate concerns have emerged just as our relationship was developing into something meaningful. The accusation that she might be using the HR situation as an excuse to create distance sparked a flare of anger. That's unfair and you know it. I've been nothing but honest about my feelings and my concerns. Have you? His gaze was challenging, reminiscent of their earliest confrontations. Or have you been looking for reasons to maintain safe distance? First it was professional boundaries, then your family obligations, now corporate policy. There's always something, isn't there? The observation hit uncomfortably close to truth Olivia wasn't entirely ready to acknowledge. Had she been unconsciously seeking reasons to avoid deeper commitment? Had fear of loss been driving her decisions more than she realized? That's not fair, she repeated, though with less conviction. Isn't it? Ethan's expression softened slightly, anger giving way to something more vulnerable. Olivia, I understand caution. I understand fear. God knows I've used my accident as an excuse to isolate myself from any meaningful connection. But at some point, we have to decide if what we're building is worth fighting for. The simple question cut through layers of rationalization and self-protection. What were they building? And was it worth the professional complications, the potential gossip, the challenges that lay ahead? Before she could respond, Ethan's phone chimed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. It's Catherine. Impeccable timing as always. You should take it, Olivia said, grateful for the momentary reprieve from their increasingly intense conversation. I need some time to think anyway. Ethan hesitated, clearly torn between continuing their discussion and addressing what was likely the source of their current predicament. This isn't finished, he said finally, accepting the call as Olivia slipped from the room. She retreated to the garden, finding solace in the space they had created together. The stone paths, flowering plants, and tranquil water feature represented tangible evidence of their collaboration. Professional and personal boundaries blurring as they transformed neglect into beauty. Was that not a metaphor for what had happened between them as well? The sound of wheels on gravel announced Ethan's approach 20 minutes later. His expression was thunderous, confirming her suspicion about the call's content. "Catherine has been appointed to the board," he announced without preamble. "Apparently her father's significant investment in our latest funding round came with conditions I wasn't informed about." Olivia absorbed this information, understanding its implications immediately. So the concerns about our relationship were almost certainly initiated by her, yes. Ethan's hands gripped his wheelchair arms with barely contained fury. She framed it as corporate governance and appropriate oversight, but the message was clear. She's positioning herself to influence company direction during my treatment absence. What does this mean for the community center? For your treatment protocol? Nothing changes with the treatment, he said firmly. I've worked too hard to regain function to allow corporate politics to interfere with that process. He paused, his expression softening as he gazed at the gardens surrounding them. As for the community center, that depends largely on you. The simple statement placed responsibility squarely on her shoulders, not just for the project's future, but for the direction of their relationship. Olivia felt the weight of it, understanding that her next decisions would shape paths that extended far beyond professional considerations. I need some time, she said finally, to think clearly about what makes the most sense for everyone involved. Ethan nodded, accepting her need for space despite the tension still evident in his posture. Take whatever time you need. I'll be here. The drive home gave Olivia space to process the day's revelations, her mind cycling through practical concerns and emotional responses in equal measure. The family home was quiet when she arrived, her mother resting after her treatment session, Jason at his engineering lab, Grace at volleyball practice. The solitude was welcome, allowing her to sort through tangled thoughts without interruption. She settled on the back porch swing her father had built, the gentle motion soothing as she considered her options. Remaining in Charleston while Ethan underwent treatment in Baltimore was the safest choice professionally. It would silence corporate concerns, maintain clear boundaries, and protect both their reputations from potential gossip. It would also mean abandoning him during one of the most challenging periods of his life, leaving him to face pain, uncertainty, and medical procedures without the support system they had carefully constructed together. The thought created a hollow ache in her chest that no professional rationalization could fill. The sound of the front door opening interrupted her contemplation. Diana Morgan appeared in the doorway, her movement slow but steady as she made her way to the swing. "Room for your mother?" she asked with a gentle smile. Olivia shifted to make space, noting with relief that her mother's color had improved significantly since beginning the new treatment. "How are you feeling today?" "Better than you, from the look of things," Diana replied, maternal perception cutting through pretense. "What's troubling you, sweetheart?" The simple question opened floodgates Olivia hadn't realized were straining. In halting sentences, she explained the situation with HR, Catherine's appointment to the board, and the implications for her relationship with Ethan and her role in the community center project. Diana listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. When Olivia finally fell silent, she took her daughter's hand in her own. "What does your heart tell you to do?" she asked simply. Olivia sighed, frustration evident in her voice. "My heart isn't being particularly helpful. It's telling me to go to Baltimore, to be with him during treatment, to explore whatever this connection between us might become. But my head is listing all the practical reasons that's a terrible idea." "Your head has been in charge for quite some time now," Diana observed gently. "Since your father died, you've made every decision based on practical considerations, what the family needed, what made financial sense, what secured our future. You've carried that burden beautifully, Olivia. But perhaps it's time to let your heart have a voice too. It's not that simple, Mom. There are real consequences to consider: professional reputation, career trajectory, financial stability." "Of course there are. Life rarely offers perfect clarity or risk-free choices." Diana's eyes held wisdom born of her own difficult journey. "But I've watched you come alive these past months in a way I haven't seen since before your father's death. This work with Ethan, it's not just a job to you anymore. And he's not just an employer." Olivia couldn't deny the truth in her mother's observation. "No, he's not. But that's exactly what complicates everything." "Love always complicates things," Diana said with a small smile. "That's how you know it's real." The word love hung in the air between them, neither confirming nor denying its applicability to the situation at hand. Olivia had carefully avoided using that particular term even in her private thoughts, though the emotions swirling within her had grown increasingly difficult to categorize as anything less. What about you? She asked, deflecting from her own emotional reckoning. If I went to Baltimore, even temporarily, I'd be leaving you during your treatment. I'm doing better, Diana reminded her. The new protocol is working. Jason and Grace are perfectly capable of helping around the house. And Baltimore is a 2-hour flight, not another planet. She squeezed her daughter's hand. You've put everyone else first for so long, Olivia. Maybe it's time to consider what you want, just this once. The conversation shifted to lighter topics: Grace's college applications, Jason's progress with the battery technology Ethan had arranged for his project, neighborhood gossip that Diana had collected during her brief outings. Yet her mother's words lingered, challenging the careful barriers Olivia had constructed between professional obligation and personal desire. Later that evening, as she sorted through emails and project documents in her childhood bedroom, Olivia's phone chimed with a message from Ethan. Are you free to talk? The simple question carried weight beyond its words. She hesitated, then replied, yes. Give me 5 minutes to step outside, . The night air held a hint of approaching winter as Olivia settled on the front porch steps, pulling her cardigan closer against the chill. When her phone rang, she answered immediately. Hi, she said simply. Hi. Ethan's voice was warm despite the digital connection between them. I wanted to apologize for earlier. I was frustrated with the situation and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. The admission, freely given without expectation of reciprocal apology, reflected how far he had come from the bitter, isolated man she had first encountered. Thank you. I understand the frustration. It's a complicated situation. It is, he agreed. But that doesn't justify my reaction. A pause, then, have you had time to think? Olivia watched a car pass slowly down the quiet residential street, its headlights briefly illuminating the massive oak tree in the front yard. I'm still processing everything. I've been thinking too, Ethan said, his voice taking on a more determined quality. About what matters most to me at this point in my life. About what I'm willing to fight for. Something in his tone made Olivia's heart beat faster. And what conclusions have you reached? That I don't want corporate politics or Catherine's manipulations to dictate the course of my life anymore. That I'm tired of making decisions based on what's expected rather than what fulfills me. His voice softened. That the thought of going to Baltimore without you feels like returning to the isolation I lived in before you arrived. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within her. Ethan, I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight, he continued. I understand you need time to consider all the implications. But I wanted you to know where I stand. Whatever you decide about Baltimore, about your role in the company, about us, I will support you. But I hope you'll consider what we might build together, not just what obstacles stand in our way. Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes, unexpected emotion welling up at his words. Thank you for that. It means more than you know. They talked for another hour about the community center progress, about Diana's improving health, about books they'd recently read and music that moved them. The conversation flowed naturally between professional matters and personal connection, reinforcing the unique bond that had developed between them over the past months. When they finally said goodnight, Olivia remained on the porch steps, gazing up at stars partially obscured by city lights. Her mother's question echoed in her mind. What did her heart tell her to do? The answer, when she allowed herself to acknowledge it fully, was surprisingly clear. The following morning, Olivia arrived at Westbrook Innovations headquarters with purpose in her stride and determination in her expression. She had requested an early meeting with Claire Wilson, prepared to address the situation directly rather than allowing uncertainty to linger. Claire welcomed her with professional courtesy, though surprise flickered across her features at Olivia's confident demeanor. You've reached a decision quickly, she observed as they settled in the same conference room as their previous meeting. I have, Olivia confirmed. But first, I'd like to clarify a few points about my current role and the community center project. She proceeded to outline her contributions over the past months. The transition from personal assistant to project coordinator. The expansion of responsibilities based on demonstrated capability rather than personal favor. The strategic value of the community center to Westbrook Innovations' evolving mission. Her presentation was precise, professional, and backed by documentation she had prepared overnight. These are impressive achievements, Claire acknowledged when Olivia finished. No one is questioning your capability or contributions, Olivia. I understand that. But context matters when evaluating appropriate boundaries and reporting structures. Olivia leaned forward slightly, her expression determined. I've prepared a proposal that I believe addresses the board's concerns. while preserving the momentum of the community center project. She slid a folder across the table, a mirror image of the one Claire had presented the previous day. I'm requesting a formal transfer to the community center development team, reporting directly to David Chun rather than to Ethan. This creates appropriate separation in the reporting structure while allowing me to continue the work I've started. Claire reviewed the proposal with careful attention, her expression revealing nothing. And Baltimore? I intend to divide my time between Charleston and Baltimore during the initial construction phase, Olivia replied steadily. Approximately 2 weeks in each location, with clear documentation of all project-related activities and expenses. The board specifically recommended you remain in Charleston. The board made that recommendation without full understanding of my role in the project or the practical requirements of the construction phase. Olivia countered politely but firmly. I'm prepared to discuss this directly with them if necessary. Claire studied her for a long moment, professional assessment giving way to something closer to respect. That won't be necessary. Your proposal is reasonable and addresses the primary concerns. I'll present it to the board with my recommendation for approval. Thank you. Olivia maintained her professional demeanor despite the relief flooding through her. There's one additional matter I'd like to address. Yes, my personal relationship with Ethan Westbrook. She met Claire's gaze directly, refusing to shrink from the delicate topic. While I understand and respect corporate policy regarding supervisor-subordinate relationships, I want to be clear that any personal connection between us has developed with mutual respect and appropriate boundaries. The organizational changes I've proposed create sufficient separation to address policy concerns, but I won't pretend that our relationship is purely professional in nature. The bold statement hung in the air between them. Claire's expression shifted from surprise to thoughtful consideration. That's refreshingly direct, she said finally. Most people in your position would avoid acknowledging any personal element. I believe in transparency, Olivia replied simply. Ethan's treatment in Baltimore represents a significant challenge, both professionally and personally. I intend to support him through that process, as a colleague and as someone who cares about his well-being. If that creates insurmountable problems from a corporate perspective, I need to know now rather than later. Claire closed the folder, her decision apparently made. Your proposal creates appropriate organizational separation. What develops between you and Ethan as individuals, outside the direct reporting relationship, is not the company's primary concern, provided it doesn't impact business operations or create conflicts of interest. The measured response represented as close to approval as corporate policy would allow. Olivia nodded, accepting the parameters. Thank you for your candor. I should be thanking you for yours, Claire replied with the ghost of a smile. It's refreshing in an environment where most people operate through layers of political calculation. She rose, extending her hand. I'll present your proposal to the board this afternoon and advocate for its approval, she said with quiet confidence. While I can't guarantee the outcome, I believe your thoughtful approach addresses their concerns while preserving what matters most for the project's success. The phone call came just as Olivia was preparing for the groundbreaking ceremony at the community center site. It was Claire Wilson, her voice tight with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The board approved your proposal, she announced without preamble. Effective immediately, you're officially transferred to the community center development team, reporting to David Chin. Olivia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you, Claire. I appreciate you advocating for my position. You made it easy to advocate for you, Claire replied, her voice softening slightly. Your proposal was well-reasoned and your commitment to the project is undeniable. I suspect it also helped that David personally vouched for your capabilities. David Chin, Ethan's longtime friend and business partner, had been a quiet but consistent ally since she'd arrived at Westbrook Innovations. His support now felt like a validation of her efforts, a confirmation that her contributions were valued independently of her relationship with Ethan. Please convey my gratitude to David, Olivia said. And thank you for your honesty and fairness throughout this process. It was my pleasure, Claire replied. And Olivia? Yes. Whatever happens between you and Ethan in Baltimore, I wish you both the best. You've brought a much-needed human element to this company, and I hope that continues regardless of organizational charts or corporate politics. The unexpected sentiment touched Olivia deeply. Thank you, Claire. That means a lot. She ended the call and turned her attention to the day ahead, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Westbrook Community Innovation Center was scheduled for 3 p.m. and there were countless details requiring her attention before then. This project, born from architectural sketches she'd discovered in Ethan's storage room and nurtured through their shared vision, represented far more than professional achievement. It had become the tangible embodiment of transformation both for the community it would serve and for the two people who had created it together. The Charleston sky had other plans for their carefully orchestrated ceremony. By noon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and by 2 o'clock, the heavens opened with the kind of torrential downpour that seemed determined to wash away months of planning in a matter of minutes. The elegant white tents erected for the occasion swayed dangerously in the wind, their canvas walls billowing like sails. City officials, board members, and media representatives huddled beneath inadequate shelter, exchanging glances that questioned the wisdom of continuing. Olivia stood at the edge of the construction site, rain soaking through her carefully selected outfit, clipboard clutched protectively against her chest. 3 days before Ethan's departure for Baltimore, the ceremony represented a symbolic beginning, not just for the community center but for their future together. Now nature seemed determined to wash away those carefully laid plans. "We should postpone," David Chin suggested, appearing beside her with concern etched across his features. "This weather isn't letting up anytime soon." Olivia glanced toward the main tent where Ethan waited in his wheelchair, deep in conversation with the mayor despite the rain dripping through a growing tear in the canvas above them. His determination to proceed despite the elements was evident in his posture and expression. "He wants this to happen before he leaves," she replied, wiping rain from her face. "It matters to him, having this positive beginning to focus on during treatment." David followed her gaze, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Then we make it happen. What do you need?" Her mind shifted into problem-solving mode, assessing resources and possibilities. "The community center auditorium 2 blocks away, is it available?" "Let me check." David pulled out his phone, ducking beneath a nearby awning to make the call. 15 minutes later, through a combination of quick thinking, David's connections, and the cooperative spirit of those gathered, the ceremony relocated to the historic auditorium. Soaked attendees found themselves in a warm, dry space with hastily arranged refreshments and a makeshift stage where the architectural renderings could be displayed. As Olivia directed the last-minute arrangements, she caught Ethan watching her from across the room, admiration evident in his expression. She moved to his side, professional composure masking the deeper connection that had solidified between them since their honest conversations following the board's intervention. "Crisis averted," she said, smoothing her damp hair self-consciously. "Thanks to you," Ethan replied, his voice warm with appreciation. "You're remarkable under pressure, do you know that?" "Just doing my job," she demurred, though his praise sent warmth spreading through her despite her rain-chilled skin. "No," he corrected gently. "You're doing far more than your job description requires. You always have." He glanced around at the transformed space, at the community members now mingling comfortably despite the weather-related disruption. "This place, this project, it wouldn't exist without you, Olivia." Before she could respond, the mayor approached, signaling it was time to begin. Olivia squeezed Ethan's shoulder briefly, a gesture of support that managed to remain professionally appropriate while conveying deeper understanding before moving to coordinate the speaker's sequence. The ceremony proceeded smoothly with civic leaders praising the innovative design and community focus of the center. When Ethan's turn came to speak, Olivia watched with quiet pride as he addressed the gathering with passion and vision that transcended his physical limitations. The wheelchair that had once seemed to define him now appeared incidental to his presence, a detail rather than the essence. The Westbrook Community Innovation Center represents more than accessible architecture, he told the attentive audience. It embodies a fundamental belief that spaces shape experiences, that design can either limit or liberate human potential. Every element of the center, from its flowing circulation to its integrated technology, was conceived with a simple question in mind: how can we create environments that empower rather than restrict? His gaze found Olivia's as he continued, his words taking on additional meaning in the context of their shared journey. Sometimes the most valuable innovations emerge from unexpected challenges. Sometimes what initially appears to be limitation becomes the catalyst for reimagining possibilities. This center grew from that process, a collaboration between technical expertise and human insight, between architectural vision and lived experience. The ceremony concluded with symbolic turning of soil in decorative planters and indoor adaptation of the traditional groundbreaking. As attendees mingled during the reception that followed, Olivia found herself approached by Catherine Pierce, whose appointment to the board had created such turmoil just days earlier. Quite the save with the venue change, Catherine observed, her tone politely neutral though her eyes remained calculating. Ethan must be pleased with your efficiency. Olivia maintained professional composure despite the subtle barb. The entire team worked together to ensure the ceremony could proceed. It was a collaborative effort. Yes, I've noticed how collaborative your relationship with Ethan has become. Catherine sipped her champagne, watching Olivia over the rim of her glass. The board was quite interested in that dynamic. The board approved my transition to the Community Center Development Team, reporting to David Chin, Olivia replied evenly. Any concerns about reporting structures have been addressed. Catherine's perfectly manicured fingers tightened slightly around her glass. Reporting structures are just one aspect of appropriate professional boundaries, Ms. Morgan. Ethan's position as CEO requires certain standards of conduct, especially during his treatment absence. The implied threat was clear despite its careful packaging. Olivia met Catherine's gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. Mr. Westbrook's personal choices are his own, Ms. Pierce. As are mine. The board's legitimate concerns about corporate governance have been addressed through organizational changes that I fully support. How diplomatic, Catherine murmured. I wonder if you'll maintain that professional distance during his extended stay in Baltimore. I'll be dividing my time between Charleston and Baltimore to oversee initial construction while coordinating with the design team, Olivia explained, the response practiced from her board presentation. My travel schedule has been approved by Mr. Chin and documented appropriately. Catherine's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, everything by the book. Still, 6 months is a long time. Medical treatments can be unpredictable, stressful. People often reveal their true natures under such circumstances. The implication that Ethan might somehow disappoint or reject Olivia during his treatment struck closer to her private fears than she cared to admit. Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal this vulnerability, Ethan himself approached, his timing either coincidental or deliberately protective. Catherine, he acknowledged with cool professionalism. I trust you're finding the board orientation materials helpful. Very comprehensive, she replied, her demeanor shifting subtly in his presence. Though I have some questions about the Innovation Division's budget allocations. Perhaps we could discuss them before you leave for Baltimore. David handles those details now, Ethan replied smoothly. As you know, I'm focusing on strategic direction rather than operational management during my treatment period. He turned to Olivia. The mayor's requesting those sustainability specification sheets. Would you mind retrieving them from the car? The transparent excuse to extract her from the uncomfortable conversation would have irritated Olivia in their earlier days together. Now she recognized it as protective rather than controlling, an offer of escape she could accept or decline according to her preference. Of course, she replied, grateful for the reprieve. Excuse me, Miss Pierce. As she walked away, she heard Catherine's voice drop to a more intimate register. Ethan, we really should catch up properly before you leave. For old time's sake. Olivia didn't hear his response, but his expression when he rejoined her 10 minutes later suggested Catherine's overture had been firmly declined. Sorry about that, he said quietly as they reviewed the sustainability documentation together. Catherine has always had a talent for finding vulnerabilities and exploiting them. It's fine, Olivia assured him, though the encounter had left her unsettled. She's just marking her territory. Ethan's expression darkened. You're not territory to be marked, Olivia. And neither am I, not anymore. The simple declaration, delivered with quiet certainty, eased something in her chest that had tightened during Catherine's subtle provocations. Whatever challenges lay ahead in Baltimore, whatever complications their evolving relationship might face, Ethan's clarity about his own boundaries provided solid ground beneath her feet. The remainder of the ceremony passed without further incident, though Olivia noticed Catherine's calculating gaze following them as they interacted with community members and project partners. By late afternoon, as the final guests departed and cleanup began, exhaustion from the day's emotional and logistical challenges caught up with her. You should go home, Ethan suggested, noticing her fatigue. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be busy enough with final preparations for Baltimore. I still have the press packets to finalize, she protested weakly. They can wait until morning, he insisted gently. You've done more than enough today. The drive home through rain-slicked streets gave Olivia time to process the day's events. The ceremony's success despite weather challenges, Catherine's veiled warnings, the impending separation as Ethan began his treatment in Baltimore. Mixed emotions swirled within her. Pride in the project's launch, anxiety about the months ahead, and beneath it all, a growing certainty about her feelings for Ethan that both comforted and terrified her. She arrived home to find her mother in the kitchen preparing dinner, her movements slow but steady, evidence of the new treatment's positive effects. Diana looked up with a warm smile as Olivia entered, her maternal perception immediately noting her daughter's conflicted expression. Rough day? She asked, stirring something that filled the kitchen with comforting aromas of herbs and spices. Complicated? Olivia replied, sinking into a chair at the worn kitchen table. The groundbreaking ceremony was nearly washed out by the storm. We had to relocate everything at the last minute. But you managed it, Diana observed, setting a cup of tea before her daughter. You always do. And Catherine Pierce made a point of reminding me that she's watching my relationship with Ethan. Olivia wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its heat. Subtly threatening, but effective. Diana's expression sharpened with protective concern. That woman seems determined to make things difficult for you. She's determined to maintain control over Ethan, or at least his company, Olivia corrected. I'm just collateral damage in that strategy. How is Ethan handling it? Better than I expected, Olivia admitted. He's been clear about boundaries with her, supportive of my role in the project. It's just, she hesitated, the deeper concern difficult to articulate. Just what, sweetheart? Diana prompted gently. What if Catherine's right about one thing? 6 months of intensive medical treatment. It changes people, changes relationships. What if what's growing between us now can't survive that kind of stress? Diana set aside her cooking spoon and joined Olivia at the table, her expression thoughtful. When your father was diagnosed with heart disease, the doctors told him he needed to change everything: diet, exercise, stress levels, work schedule. It was overwhelming, frightening for both of us. Olivia nodded, remembering that difficult period. Her father's initial resistance, the family adjustments, the gradual acceptance of a new normal. We had been married 15 years by then, Diana continued. I thought I knew everything about Thomas, about our relationship. But that health crisis revealed aspects of both of us I hadn't fully seen before. His vulnerability, my strength, our capacity to adapt together rather than fracture apart. But Dad still died, Olivia said softly, the old grief surfacing. Despite everything you both did. Yes, he did. Years later, from a sudden event we couldn't have prevented. Diana reached for her daughter's hand. But those years between diagnosis and loss, they were deeper, richer because of what we'd faced together. The crisis didn't weaken our connection. It strengthened it. The perspective shifted something in Olivia's thinking, reframing the Baltimore treatment not as a threat to their developing relationship, but as a crucible that might reveal its true strength and character. What Ethan's facing isn't a death sentence, Diana reminded her. It's a difficult treatment with uncertain outcomes. How you support each other through that uncertainty. That's what will define whatever is growing between you. Olivia squeezed her mother's hand gratefully. When did you get so wise? Around the time my extraordinary daughter started carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, Diana replied with a gentle smile. Now, tell me more about the ceremony. Did the mayor actually wear that terrible bow tie he's so fond of? The conversation shifted to lighter topics, the kitchen filling with laughter as Olivia recounted the day's more humorous moments. Later, as she helped clear the dinner dishes, her phone chimed with a message from Ethan. Asterisk, could you come to the mansion tonight? There's something I need to show you before we leave for Baltimore. Asterisk. The request, unexpected but intriguing, brought her back to the mansion shortly after 8 o'clock. Marcus admitted her with his usual quiet efficiency, directing her toward the garden rather than Ethan's office or the sunroom where they typically worked. She found the garden transformed in the evening darkness, Small lights illuminated the pathways, their gentle glow reflecting off the rain-dampened foliage and creating an almost magical atmosphere. The storm had passed, leaving behind clear skies where stars emerged like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Ethan waited near the water feature they had designed together, his wheelchair positioned beside a stone bench. He looked up as she approached, his expression a mixture of anticipation and something deeper she couldn't quite name. "This is beautiful," she said, gesturing to the illuminated garden. "When did you arrange all this?" "This afternoon, while you were finalizing the press materials," he replied. Marcus helped. He indicated the bench beside him. "Please sit. There's something I want to discuss before we leave for Baltimore." Olivia settled onto the bench, suddenly nervous, though she couldn't have explained why. "Is everything all right? Has something changed with the treatment plan?" "Nothing's changed with the treatment," he assured her. "This is about something else entirely." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Olivia, these past months working with you have transformed my life in ways I never anticipated when I hired you." The serious tone sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. "Ethan, please let me finish," he requested gently. "This isn't easy for me." At her nod, he continued. "Before my accident, I measured success in financial terms, in market share and technological innovation. After the accident, I couldn't measure success at all, could only quantify loss and limitation." He gestured to the garden surrounding them, his expression softening. "Then you arrived with your categorical filing system and your stubborn determination and your ability to see possibilities where I saw only obstacles. You challenged me, supported me, refused to accept the walls I'd built around myself." Emotion tightened Olivia's throat as she recognized the courage this level of vulnerability required from a man who had spent his life projecting strength and control. "The community center matters to me," Ethan continued, "not just as a professional achievement but as a symbol of what's possible when we refuse to be defined by limitation. But even more than the project itself, what matters to me is the partnership we've built, the trust, the honesty, the shared vision." He reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers despite the evening chill. "I know the timing is complicated. I know Baltimore represents significant challenges for both of us, professionally and personally. But before we face those challenges, I wanted to be absolutely clear about my feelings." Olivia's heart raced as she recognized the significance of this moment, a threshold they were crossing together, from which there would be no simple return to professional distance. "I'm in love with you, Olivia Morgan," Ethan said simply, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the confession. "Not because you've helped me through difficult times, not because you've contributed to my professional success, but because you've shown me what it means to live fully despite circumstances, to find joy in simple moments, to create beauty from neglect, to face uncertainty with grace and courage." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, emotion overwhelming her usual composure. "Ethan, You don't need to respond in kind," he assured her quickly. "I understand if your feelings aren't as clear or if you need more time. I just couldn't leave for Baltimore without telling you the truth, without making sure you understand that whatever happens with the treatment, whatever professional complications we face, my feelings for you are the most certain thing in my life right now." The simple honesty of his declaration broke through the last of Olivia's carefully maintained defenses. The fears that had kept her hesitant, of professional complications, of Catherine's machinations, of uncertain medical outcomes, suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the truth of what had grown between them. "I love you too," she said, her voice soft but certain. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. Afraid of what it might mean for my job, for my family's security. Afraid of losing someone else I care about." She squeezed his hand, anchoring herself in the connection between them. "But I'm tired of making decisions based on fear rather than hope." Relief and joy transformed Ethan's features, erasing the lines of tension and pain that had become so familiar. "Hope," he repeated, the word carrying weight beyond its single syllable. "That's what you've given me, Olivia. Not just professionally or physically, but the hope that life can be rich and meaningful even when it takes unexpected turns." He reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that sent Olivia's heart racing with momentary panic. Noting her expression, he laughed softly. "Don't worry, it's not a ring, at least not yet." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver key attached to a simple chain. "This is a key to the garden gate, a private entrance separate from the main house security system. I wanted you to know that regardless of who's watching or what corporate policies dictate, this space we've created together will always be open to you." The gesture, symbolic yet practical, romantic without being overwhelming, perfectly captured the balance they had found together. Olivia took the key, its weight solid and reassuring in her palm. "It's beautiful," she said, emotion making her voice unsteady. "Thank you." "May I?" Ethan asked, gesturing to the necklace. At her nod, he carefully fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin with gentle intimacy. The key rested just below her collarbone, catching the garden lights with subtle gleams. "Perfect," he murmured, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Like you." Olivia shook her head slightly, a smile playing at her lips despite the tears threatening to spill. "Hardly perfect. Stubborn. Sometimes too direct. Definitely overcommit. Perfect for me," Ethan amended, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with exquisite tenderness. "Exactly what I need, even when it challenges me. Especially then." The moment suspended between them, charged with emotion and possibility. Then, with the natural gravity of planets aligning, they leaned toward each other. Their first kiss was gentle, exploratory, a confirmation of feelings long developing rather than a sudden passion. Ethan's lips were warm against hers, his hand steady where it cradled her face, his touch conveying reverence and desire in equal measure. When they finally parted, Olivia rested her forehead against his, unwilling to move further away. "What happens now?" she whispered, the practical question emerging despite the emotional moment. Ethan smiled, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "Now we face Baltimore together. The treatment, the community center construction, Catherine's corporate maneuvering, all of it. Not as boss and assistant, but as partners in every sense." "Partners," she repeated, liking the sound of the word and all it implied. "I can work with that. I was hoping you'd say that." He kissed her again, briefly but with promise of more to come. "There's something else I wanted to show you." From his other pocket, he withdrew a folded document that he handed to her with surprising solemnity. Olivia opened it, scanning the contents with growing surprise. "This is a lease agreement," she said, looking up in confusion. "For an apartment in Baltimore. Near Johns Hopkins," Ethan confirmed. 2 bedrooms, wheelchair accessible, with a small balcony garden. "I've taken it for the duration of my treatment. But I thought you'd be staying at the medical center, at least initially." "That was the original plan," he acknowledged. "But after our recent conversations, I started considering alternatives that might accommodate a different arrangement." His expression grew more serious. "The apartment is in both our names, Olivia. No corporate connection, no Westbrook Innovations involvement. Just us, as individuals, sharing a space when you're in Baltimore." The significance of this arrangement, its careful separation from professional entanglements, its respect for her independence while creating space for their relationship to develop, touched Olivia deeply. "You've thought of everything," she said, genuine appreciation warming her voice. "I've tried," he replied, "though I'm sure there will be challenges we haven't anticipated. Medical treatments rarely proceed exactly as planned. Construction projects inevitably encounter complications, and Catherine is unlikely to abandon her efforts to assert control. We'll face those challenges as they come," Olivia said with newfound confidence. "Together." The word carried weight beyond its simple syllables. A commitment, a promise, a declaration of intent. Ethan nodded, his expression reflecting the same certainty she felt growing within herself. "Together," he agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss that spoke of beginnings rather than endings, of possibilities rather than limitations. The Baltimore apartment overlooked a small park, its second-floor balcony offering views of trees, just beginning to bud with early spring promise. Inside, the space was both practical and welcoming. Its open floor plan and widened doorways accommodating Ethan's wheelchair, while large windows filled the rooms with natural light. Olivia stood at the balcony door, watching the morning sun illuminate the cityscape, a cup of coffee warming her hands against the March chill. They had been in Baltimore for 6 weeks. Ethan's treatment protocol had begun with the expected challenges. Long days at Johns Hopkins, painful physical therapy sessions, the frustrating cycle of progress and setbacks that characterized spinal rehabilitation. Through it all, Olivia had divided her time between Baltimore and Charleston, 2 weeks in each location as they had planned, maintaining her professional responsibilities while supporting Ethan through the most difficult days. The arrangement had proven more complicated than either had anticipated. In Charleston, construction of the community center proceeded with inevitable delays and adjustments, requiring Olivia's constant attention to detail and problem-solving. In Baltimore, Ethan's treatment schedule shifted unpredictably based on his physical response and the availability of specialists. Their carefully constructed calendar frequently required last-minute revisions, testing their commitment to balancing professional obligations with personal priorities. Yet despite these practical challenges, or perhaps because of them, their relationship had deepened in ways neither could have predicted. The Baltimore apartment had become a sanctuary of sorts, a space where they could simply be themselves without corporate politics or family responsibilities intruding. Here, Olivia witnessed Ethan's vulnerability during moments of pain and frustration. Here, he saw her exhaustion after days of juggling competing demands. The honesty these circumstances required had stripped away remaining pretenses, creating a foundation of trust and mutual support stronger than anything they might have developed under less demanding conditions. The sound of movement behind her interrupted Olivia's reflection. She turned to find Ethan navigating from the bedroom to the kitchen, his movements in the manual wheelchair more fluid and confident than they had been 6 weeks earlier. "You're up early," he observed, wheeling to her side and accepting the second cup of coffee she offered. "Couldn't sleep?" "Just thinking," she replied, leaning down to kiss him good morning. "We have the design team video conference at 9, and I wanted to review the revised electrical plans beforehand." "Always working," he said with a smile that held both admiration and concern. "You need to rest sometimes too, you know," says the man who was answering emails at midnight, she countered, though her tone remained light. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" "A perfect match in workaholic tendencies," he agreed, his free hand finding hers. "But we have today. Dr. Williams canceled my afternoon session, something about a conference she's attending. What do you say we play hooky after the video call? There's an exhibit at the Baltimore Museum of Art I've been wanting to see." The suggestion, spontaneous and unrelated to work or treatment, represented progress of a different kind. Early in their Baltimore stay, Ethan had resisted venturing out except for medical appointments, uncomfortable with public reactions to his wheelchair and the physical limitations that remained more visible in unfamiliar environments. His willingness to explore the city now signaled growing confidence not just in his physical capabilities but in his identity beyond his disability. "I'd love that," Olivia said, squeezing his hand. "It's a date." The phrase had become something of a private joke between them, a deliberate reclaiming of conventional relationship milestones within their decidedly unconventional circumstances. Their first official date had been to a hospital cafeteria after a particularly challenging therapy session, their second, a takeout dinner on the apartment balcony between conference calls. Each small moment of normalcy felt like a victory, a declaration that life continued despite medical procedures and professional demands. The video conference with the Charleston design team proceeded smoothly with only minor adjustments to the community center plans. As Olivia concluded the call, her phone chimed with a text from David Chin, Catherine asking questions about Baltimore apartment. Claims concern about appropriate use of company resources. "I handled it, but be prepared, She showed the message to Ethan, whose expression darkened momentarily before settling into resigned determination. "She's persistent, I'll give her that." "Does it bother you?" Olivia asked, the question more direct than she might have risked in their earlier days together. Her continued interference? Ethan considered this, his response thoughtful rather than defensive. "Not in the way it once would have. Before, I would have seen it as a challenge to my authority, a threat to my control. Now it just seems sad. She's fighting so hard for influence over a life I no longer want to live, the isolated CEO defined solely by achievement and acquisition. That version of Ethan Westbrook doesn't exist anymore, thanks to you." Olivia moved closer, perching on the arm of his wheelchair in a gesture of casual intimacy that had become natural between them. I didn't change you, Ethan. I just refused to believe the version was all you could be. And that made all the difference. He reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering against her cheek. Let Catherine play her corporate games. We're building something far more valuable than stock options or board positions. The Baltimore Museum of Art welcomed them with quiet galleries and soaring spaces, a world away from medical appointments and corporate politics. They wandered through exhibits of architectural photography and impressionist landscapes, discussing composition and light with the easy rhythm they developed over months of collaboration. Ethan's observations revealed the precision-minded engineer. Olivia's responses showed the heart-centered humanist. Together, they created a perspective neither would have achieved alone, much like their community-centered design. As they paused before a Monet painting, water lilies shimmering with reflected light, Olivia noticed Ethan watching her rather than the masterpiece. What? She asked, self-consciousness warming her cheeks. Just appreciating the view, he replied softly. You have a remarkable ability to find beauty everywhere, Olivia. Even in the most unexpected places. She smiled, recognizing the deeper meaning beneath his words. That's what my father taught me, that beauty isn't just in perfect things but in how we choose to see the world. He was a wise man, Ethan said, his hand finding hers. I wish I could have met him. He would have liked you, she assured him. Especially the man you've become. They lingered in the museum cafe afterward, discussing adjustments to the community center based on design elements they'd observed. The conversation flowed naturally between professional collaboration and personal connection, the boundaries between roles having dissolved months ago into something more integrated, more meaningful. As they prepared to leave, Ethan's phone rang. Dr. Williams, despite her supposed conference commitment. His expression shifted as he listened, moving from surprise to cautious excitement. Are you certain? He asked, his grip tightening on the phone. When can we proceed? Another pause, then, yes, tomorrow works. Thank you, Sarah. This is significant news. He ended the call, his expression a complex mixture of emotions Olivia couldn't immediately interpret. What is it? She asked, concern and curiosity mingling in her voice. Has something changed with the treatment plan? You could say that, Ethan replied, a smile slowly spreading across his features. The latest nerve conduction studies show significantly more regeneration than they expected at this stage. Dr. Williams wants to accelerate the electrical stimulation protocol and begin more intensive mobility training immediately. That's wonderful news, Olivia said, reaching for his hand. Isn't it? It is, he confirmed, though something in his expression suggested more complex emotions beneath the surface. It also means my schedule here will intensify considerably. Daily therapy sessions, possibly extending into evenings. It would make your 2-week rotations between Baltimore and Charleston even more complicated than they already are. Understanding dawned as Olivia recognized the real concern beneath his words. You're worried about how this affects our arrangement. I'm worried about asking too much of you, he clarified, his expression serious. You've already rearranged your life around my treatment schedule, divided yourself between 2 cities, managed construction in Charleston while supporting me here. This acceleration means more demands, more uncertainty. Olivia considered this, appreciating his concern while recognizing the opportunity the medical development represented. What if we approach this differently, she suggested. The community center foundation is complete, walls going up next week. David has proven he can manage the day-to-day oversight. What if I stayed in Baltimore full-time for the next phase of your treatment? I could coordinate remotely with Charleston, travel back only for critical inspections. You'd do that? The question held both hope and hesitation. What about your family, your responsibilities there? Mom is doing remarkably well on the new treatment protocol. Jason and Grace have proven they can manage the household. And Baltimore is just a 2-hour flight from Charleston, she reminded him. This is an opportunity, Ethan. A chance for your recovery to progress faster than anyone expected. I want to be here for that. The simple declaration, prioritizing their relationship and his recovery above professional convenience, represented how far they had come from the cautious boundaries they had initially established. Ethan's expression softened with emotion he no longer attempted to conceal. I love you, he said simply, the words still new enough between them to carry profound weight. And I'm learning that love sometimes means accepting support even when independence seems easier. A difficult lesson for someone as self-reliant as you, Olivia observed with a gentle smile. But an important one. They left the museum hand in hand, the spring afternoon wrapping around them with unexpected warmth for March in Baltimore. As they navigated the city streets, Ethan maneuvering his wheelchair with increasing confidence, Olivia matching her pace to his. The future seemed to unfold before them with new possibilities neither had dared imagine when they first arrived 6 weeks earlier. The following months brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. Ethan's intensified treatment protocol produced remarkable progress. First, increased sensation in his left leg, then incremental movement, and finally enough strength to begin standing with support. Each milestone arrived with a mixture of physical pain and emotional elation, Olivia witnessing both his determination during grueling therapy sessions and his private moments of doubt when progress plateaued. In Charleston, the community center rose steadily despite construction delays and budget adjustments. Olivia coordinated remotely most days, traveling back for critical inspections and meetings that required her physical presence. Catherine continued her subtle campaign of corporate interference, questioning expense allocations and project timelines, though David's steady leadership largely insulated them from her direct influence. By mid-June, as summer heat settled over Baltimore, Dr. Williams delivered news that altered their carefully constructed reality once again. The treatment protocol has been more successful than we anticipated, she explained during a consultation in her office. Medical charts and imaging studies spread across her desk. The combination of electrical stimulation and intensive physical therapy has created neural pathways we hadn't expected to develop for at least another 3 months. What does that mean practically? Olivia asked, having learned to translate medical optimism into tangible implications. It means Ethan is ready for the next phase, Dr. Williams replied with a smile. Gait training with specialized equipment, transitioning to forearm crutches for limited distances. And it means this phase can continue in Charleston, with periodic check-ins here rather than full-time residence. The possibility of returning to Charleston, of continuing recovery while resuming more normal life patterns, hung in the air between them as they left the hospital, both processing the implications of this unexpected development. How do you feel about going home? Olivia asked as they sat on their apartment balcony that evening, watching twilight settle over the city that had been their temporary home. Ethan considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Grateful for the progress, apprehensive about the transition, and he hesitated, searching for the right words, uncertain about what home means now. Olivia understood the deeper question beneath his statement. Their relationship had developed within the unique bubble of Baltimore, medical treatments creating vulnerability, distance from corporate politics allowing honesty, the apartment providing neutral territory that belonged to both of them equally. Returning to Charleston meant re-entering the world where he was CEO and she was an employee, where Catherine and the board maintained watchful oversight, where the mansion represented his life before the accident rather than the future they had begun building together. Home is wherever we create it, she said finally, reaching for his hand. Whether that's your mansion, my family's house, or somewhere new entirely. The location matters less than what we bring to it. Ethan nodded, his thumb tracing familiar patterns against her palm. I've been thinking about that, about spaces and what they represent, about how the community center design evolved to reflect new possibilities rather than being limited by traditional expectations. Applied architectural philosophy? She teased gently, though she sensed a deeper current beneath his words. Something like that. He met her gaze directly, vulnerability and determination mingling in his expression. The mansion never felt like home, even before the accident. It was a statement, a symbol of achievement, designed to impress rather than comfort. After the accident, it became a beautiful prison, adapted for accessibility but still fundamentally isolating. Olivia nodded, understanding his assessment from her own experience of the space. Despite its grandeur and the garden they had created together, the mansion retained a certain coldness, an emotional distance embedded in its very architecture. What are you suggesting? She asked, recognizing that this conversation was leading somewhere specific. I'm suggesting we consider alternatives, Ethan replied, his expression lightening with unexpected enthusiasm. The community center design process taught me how spaces shape experiences, how architecture can either limit or liberate. Why not apply those principles to our own living situation? The conversation continued late into the night, possibilities expanding as they discussed options neither had previously considered. Renovating a historic Charleston property with accessibility integrated from the beginning, designing a new home that reflected their shared aesthetic rather than just his or hers, creating spaces that accommodated both his physical needs and her family connections. By morning, what had begun as philosophical musing had crystallized into practical planning. They would return to Charleston as Dr. Williams recommended, but with a new project alongside the community center, creating a home that embodied the future they envisioned together rather than adapting to spaces designed for their separate pasts. The community center neared completion as autumn painted Charleston in shades of gold and amber. Ethan's recovery had progressed beyond even Dr. Williams' optimistic projections. He now navigated short distances with forearm crutches, though the wheelchair remained necessary for longer periods. More significant than the physical improvements was the transformation in his outlook. The bitterness that had defined him when Olivia first arrived had given way to a grounded optimism, a capacity to find meaning in both achievements and limitations. Catherine's corporate maneuvering had gradually subsided as the community center's success became undeniable. The innovative design had garnered national attention in architectural publications, and early programming had demonstrated its value to populations typically underserved by traditional spaces. Even the most skeptical board members now recognized the project as both socially valuable and strategically advantageous for Westbrook Innovation's public profile. On a perfect October afternoon, Olivia stood at the edge of the community center's central atrium, watching as visitors explored the space during the official opening celebration. Sunlight streamed through carefully positioned skylights, creating patterns across the bamboo flooring that had replaced their original tile specification, one of many adjustments made during construction that had improved upon the initial design. "Quite the achievement," said a familiar voice beside her. Olivia turned to find David Chun, his expression reflecting genuine pride in what they had accomplished together. "It exceeded our expectations," she agreed, surveying the diverse crowd, families with children, elderly visitors with mobility devices, community leaders and ordinary citizens mingling comfortably in a space designed to welcome all. "Though I'm not sure Ethan would admit we made improvements to his original vision." David laughed, the sound warm with affection for his longtime friend. "He already has, actually. Told me just this morning that your stubborn insistence on curved pathways and natural elements transformed the project from merely accessible to genuinely inviting. High praise from a man who once declared curves architecturally indulgent," Olivia replied with a smile. "You've transformed more than just his architectural preferences," David observed, his tone becoming more serious. "I've known Ethan for 20 years, through success and failure, triumph and tragedy. I've never seen him as centered, as genuinely at peace, as he is now." The simple observation touched Olivia deeply. "We've transformed each other," she said softly. "That's what partnership does at its best." David nodded, understanding the depth beneath her words. "Speaking of transformation, have you seen the latest design revisions for the house? Ethan mentioned you had concerns about the kitchen layout." Their conversation shifted to practical details of the home they were creating together, a property overlooking the harbor that combined historical Charleston architecture with modern accessibility and sustainable design. The project had become a natural extension of their work on the community center, applying principles of universal design to create a space that would accommodate not just Ethan's current needs but potential future changes for both of them. As they discussed kitchen configurations and window placements, Olivia noticed Ethan across the atrium, deep in conversation with the mayor and several community leaders. He navigated the social interaction with his natural charisma, the forearm crutches now an integrated part of his presence rather than a limitation to be overcome. Catching her gaze, he smiled, a private communication across the crowded space that still sent warmth spreading through her chest despite the months they had spent together. Later, as the celebration continued into early evening, Ethan found her in the garden courtyard, another element she had insisted on incorporating into the design despite initial budget concerns. "Hiding from your admirers?" he asked, maneuvering to sit beside her on a bench positioned to catch the setting sun. "Taking a moment to appreciate what we've accomplished," she corrected, making space for him. It's everything we hoped for, isn't it? More, he agreed, his gaze taking in the courtyard where children played on accessible equipment while parents conversed on comfortable seating arranged for both wheelchair users and conventional chairs. It's a template for what's possible when design considers the full spectrum of human experience. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, shoulders touching, the simple contact a reminder of the connection that had developed between them. First professional, then personal, now an integrated whole greater than either part alone. "I have something for you," Ethan said finally, reaching into his jacket pocket, a small token to mark the occasion. He withdrew a velvet box similar to the one that had contained the garden key months earlier. This one, when opened, revealed a simple silver key on a delicate chain, matching the one she still wore, but with subtle differences in its design. "Another key?" she asked, lifting it from the box with curious fingers. "To our new home," he explained, his expression both serious and joyful. "The contractors confirmed this morning that we can take occupancy next week. The accessible features are complete, though some of the cosmetic elements will continue for another month." Olivia stared at the key, its significance suddenly overwhelming. "So soon? I thought we were still weeks away from completion." "I may have encouraged an accelerated timeline," he admitted with a hint of his old commanding presence. "With appropriate compensation for the contractors, of course." She laughed, recognizing the blend of impatience and generosity that characterized his approach to projects he cared about. Always efficient when motivated. Very motivated in this case. His expression shifted to something more vulnerable, more earnest. "Olivia, these past months, in Baltimore, here in Charleston, working on the community center and planning our home, they've shown me what's possible when we build something together. Not just physically, but emotionally, practically, in every dimension that matters." The intensity in his voice caught her attention, his words carrying weight beyond simple appreciation for their collaboration. Ethan reached for her hand, his grip steady and warm against her skin. "I had a different plan for this moment," he continued, a rare nervousness entering his tone. "Something more traditional, more carefully orchestrated. But sitting here in this garden we designed together, watching people enjoy the space we created, it feels right to ask now, in the midst of what we've built together rather than in some artificially perfect setting." Understanding dawned as he shifted slightly on the bench, positioning himself to face her more directly. "Ethan, Olivia Morgan," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "You came into my life when I was at my lowest point, bitter, isolated, defined by what I'd lost rather than what remained possible. You saw beyond the wheelchair, beyond the CEO title, beyond the walls I'd built around myself. You challenged me, supported me, believed in possibilities I couldn't see." He withdrew a second, smaller box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a ring, an elegant emerald surrounded by small diamonds, the setting both classic and distinctly modern. "I love you," he said simply. "Your strength, your compassion, your stubborn insistence on curved pathways when I would have designed everything in straight lines. I love the life we're creating together and the person I am when I'm with you." His voice softened with vulnerability and hope. "Will you marry me, Olivia? Will you continue building this life with me, whatever challenges and joys it may bring?" Tears blurred Olivia's vision as emotion overwhelmed her carefully maintained composure. The journey that had brought them to this moment, from reluctant employer and employee to partners in every sense, unfolded in her mind like the architectural renderings they had created together, each phase building upon the last to create something neither could have envisioned alone. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy as she reached for him. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Westbrook, curved pathways and all." His smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger contained all the warmth and light that had been missing when she first met him. Evidence of healing far deeper than physical recovery, of a heart once closed now fully open to possibility and connection. As twilight settled over the community center garden, they shared a kiss that held both promise and fulfillment, an acknowledgement of the journey behind them and the path ahead, a commitment to building a future neither had imagined possible before circumstances and courage brought them together. In the distance, The harbor lights began to twinkle against the darkening sky, Charleston wrapping around them like a familiar embrace. The garden they had created together, first at the mansion, now here at the center, soon at their new home, stood as living testimony to what was possible when limitation became inspiration, when challenge transformed into opportunity, when two people committed to seeing possibilities rather than obstacles joined their lives and hearts in common purpose. The community center would serve thousands. Their home would shelter their growing love. But the most significant architecture they had created was invisible to the eye, the foundation of trust, respect, and understanding that would support them through whatever the future might bring. A structure built to weather any storm while providing space for joy, growth, and endless possibility. When Hearts Heal beautifully illustrates a timeless truth, our actions, choices, and attitudes shape our future. Ethan Westbrook, once a man consumed by ambition and emotional detachment, faced a life-altering tragedy. Yet, through Olivia's unwavering compassion and resilience, he learned that true success isn't just measured in wealth, but in the connections we build and the kindness we show. Olivia, despite her struggles, never abandoned her principles of hard work, kindness, and integrity. In the end, her goodness was rewarded, not only with financial stability but with a love that uplifted both her and Ethan. This story reminds us that goodness is never wasted. Even when challenges seem overwhelming, those who remain honest, kind, and determined will ultimately find happiness and fulfillment. The law of cause and effect teaches us that what we give to the world will eventually come back to us. Olivia's patience and faith in Ethan helped him heal, and in return, she found the love and support she had been missing. Have you ever experienced a time when an act of kindness changed your life? Do you believe that doing good always leads to good results? Share your thoughts and personal experiences in the comments below. Let's inspire each other with stories of hope, resilience, and love. If you love heartwarming romance stories that celebrate the power of love and redemption, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Endless Romance, for more inspiring content.